video entirely. Jet has all the leadership qualities that Sokka needs to grow and become a better leader, and yet Sokka is the better leader already. When we first meet Jet, he is cool, collected, and confident. Sokka lacks the same kind of cool-headedness that Jet has, and that is immediately noticeable. In a superficial sense, that does technically make Jet the better leader in this instance. But we quickly start to see through his facade and his manipulation. We've talked about confidence before and how arrogance is a type of false confidence, but Jet seems truly confident here. He's calm and collected, and more importantly, he is more than willing to reveal his inner turmoil. Truly confident people aren't always cool, collected, and completely emotionless, like completely stoic. True confidence gives you the ability to put your emotions to the side when you need to, but also reveal them and share them when you need to. Confidence is not about not being emotional, it is about being in control of your emotions, and there's a very big difference there. And despite the fact that Jet does use this to manipulate the people around him, it's still a true story, and he still feels the same way that he reveals in this scene. He feels sad, he feels hurt, and he wants to make things right. One good quality of a leader is, when someone's making a speech, he specifically points out other people and rarely points to himself as the point of celebration after a victory. And we see that side of Jet, another great leadership quality, right before, for a brief moment, the mask fully comes off. So now the real manipulations start. The audience has been clued in, but Aang and Katara still don't quite see it. Now, Sokka's suspicion is warranted, but it is still tinged by a bit of jealousy. That's why when Jet goes, "Sokka, but I wanted you for a big mission." Almost exactly like that too. I know that's more for the audience than how the characters actually heard it, but still. Even though Sokka has every right and every reason to be suspicious, his jealousy and his feelings of inadequacy kind of come out in this opportunity to prove himself. He doesn't really care about proving himself to Jet, he cares about proving himself to his team, to Katara and Aang. He wants to show that he can cooperate and that he can get the job done. And once again, we see him being a clever hunter and warrior with his little trick in hearing the vibrations through his weapon. He tells them there's one person approaching, and this is when the mask comes fully off right in front of Sokka. And we'll see a little later why Jet feels that he can be so open and honest about his real personality and his real goals in front of Sokka, but not Katara and Aang. After seeing it's just a harmless old man, that doesn't matter to Jet. He attacks him, he knocks him over, and they take his stuff. He even berates and yells at the old man, going, "Does the Fire Nation take prisoners? Does the Fire Nation have mercy?" But Sokka, I thought you'd understand. Jet has all the makings of a great leader. He has confidence, he has charisma, he values his team, he's strategic. All are great, amazing leadership qualities. The one thing that makes Sokka a better leader, even without some of those qualities, is this. Sokka may be immature, but he's not selfish. Jet is traumatized, and he is taking out that trauma on the world. So yes, that's immature, but more importantly, that is selfish, and that's not thinking about other people. More importantly, that's not thinking about your team. He knows how to boost up his team, how to get them to work together, and how to be friends with them, but he doesn't know how to truly care about them. Even when he's trying to manipulate Katara and Aang by saying that Sokka missed the knife that absolutely was not there, he showcases a good leadership quality by making the offense that to be fair, he's making up, but he makes it forgivable and understandable. When his own crew starts to see the mask slipping, he is still incredibly manipulative, but you get the sense that he truly believes this, so in a way, he's not just manipulating them, he has manipulated himself in his trauma. And this is where we get to the point where we understand why he lets his mask slip a little bit more with Sokka than he does with the others. You see, Jet feels a kind of kinship. He sees Sokka, he knows he's intelligent, he knows he's strategic, and he knows he's the de facto leader of the gang. And he knows he lost his mother to the Fire Nation, just like Jet lost his family to the Fire Nation. So in a way, Jet really kind of hoped that Sokka would come around. It's not just manipulation. I think he really truly wanted Sokka to be a mirror and kind of validate how he feels. Sokka realized that the best way to stop this plan was to get everyone to safety before the dam blew. By showing empathy and not jumping to conclusions, Sokka is showing what Jet lacks in his leadership ability. And instead of complaining or anything like that, he goes and just does it. He has grown at least enough confidence to do that. While Sokka still has a long way to go as a leader, he has taken what he needs from Jet. He has learned his lesson. And Katara and Aang are back on his side, and they're back in the skies. And hey, when your instincts are right, they're right. And while this, I guess sometimes my instincts are wrong, is just kind of a joke, it's also part of the lesson he learned, and I just love how they wrap that all up in a joke. Actually, they do that a lot, where they wrap up the actual lesson or real meat of the story in a joke. Makes me wonder who wrote this episode. Okay, written by James Egan, head writer Aaron Ahaz, we all know that. Directed by Dave Filoni? What are you doing here? I was just going to make a one-off comment about this until I realized how important this question is to answer. Where did Jet learn how to fight? Of course he's going to get some battle experience just living his life of rebellion, but how is he so skilled with such clean technique? And why is this question so important to answer? Originally I just thought, hey, isn't that crazy? What if he had a teacher? But then I realized the implications of that. Just a few videos ago, I talked about how important the martial arts are to bending, and that still seems to be the case, but that leaves a burning question. You see, I attributed these Tai Chi motions to being the best form of waterbending, which is why Katara naturally was drawn to these movements. That's how her technique is so very Tai Chi, even having no teacher whatsoever, right? Basically, it's only because of the waterbending that she learned this type of movement and this type of fighting style. It just doesn't really work without it. But if Jet learned all of these clean, perfect kung fu techniques all on his own, then maybe it's just for aesthetics for the show and has nothing to do inherently with the style of bending. The only way that my idea really seems to work with her learning Tai Chi moves because of the waterbending is if Jet has a teacher. Now, in the show, they don't really mention it, so my question is, to everyone who's read things that maybe I haven't, because I haven't read the novels, and I haven't read the comics, and I don't know what else is out there that I haven't read, so do we know Jet's history? Do we know if he had a teacher? Now, I can't prove that he had a teacher, but I also can't prove that he learned it all on his own. No matter what the answer is, it has huge implications for this grand unified theory of bending. It will point us in the right direction. And here I was just gonna make a one-off comment like, where'd he learn this from? So do y'all know something I don't? Have y'all read or listened to other material that would point us in the direction of an answer? The Great Divide.
Let's keep flying.
I ask you once again, what is filler? A lot of people still to this day think that Warriors of Kyoshi is a filler episode, but I think we've debunked that pretty definitively. The Great Divide is pretty much the single only episode that everyone agrees is filler. But is it? The beginning of this episode starts how a lot of these episodes have gone. A smaller microcosm of the larger conflict shown through the episode. The differences between the Zhangs and the Ganjins are kind of a caricature of the differences between Katara and Sokka. I'll tell you one thing I wasn't expecting was Jesse McCartney to pop up. He has voiced Robin or Nightwing in so many DC animated films and shows that his voice is unmistakable. And speaking of recognizable voices, to any Star Trek fans or Warehouse 13 fans, everyone will recognize René Auberjonois. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but I did my best. What's interesting about this is that René Auberjonois also voices the Mechanist. Is doubling up on voice roles more indication that this is just a filler episode and they just happen to have him on hand to record these lines? Because right now we have the hardworking slobs representing Sokka, the obsessively clean Ganjins representing Katara. Or maybe it's that Sokka and Katara are representing them at the beginning. It's hard to say for sure. So we know that if there is a decent amount of character development that is important going forward for the story, I wouldn't necessarily consider that filler. Aang definitely learns a lesson about finding compromises and resolving conflict here. Also, I just want to point out that most Earthbenders would take on a landslide head-on. Head-on, apply directly to the forehead. Head-on, apply directly to the forehead. But this guy completely redirects the entire thing, doesn't hit a single rock, just redirects them over everyone. He doesn't kick them away, he doesn't smash them away, he doesn't turn them into dust, he redirects them. Is this one singular throwaway scene of bending that was just useful for the story? Or is this intentional? Are they showing that while younger Earthbenders and beginner to intermediate Earthbenders will take things head-on because that is what Earthbenders do, that a more experienced Earthbender will do things similarly to how a Waterbender or an Airbender would by simply redirecting the Force? Or am I once again overanalyzing absolutely everything? And so, of course, Sokka and Katara go with the groups that are most similar to them, and they kind of start taking their sides. And Katara gives in to peer pressure. So remember, this is a kid's show. We, the audience, are getting a lesson about honesty, sharing, and compromise. And with especially Book 1 being very episodic in nature, I'm not entirely sure where the cutoff is for filler. That being said, there's really only one question we can ask that might give us an idea on whether or not this is actually filler. A lot of people already skip this episode when they rewatch, so here's the question. Even if it's minute, even if it's a small percentage, does this make any difference to the rest of Book 1? Does this story or this episode have an impact on the pacing, on the characters, on the insight to how these characters are acting in the following episodes? I think that's how we're going to determine whether or not we think this is filler. So what do you think? Even if you think The Great Divide is a filler episode, you should never ever skip this episode. Here's why. First of all, we have a star-studded cast. If nothing else, watch it for René Auberjonois and Jesse McCartney. And especially if you're a parent watching it with kids, this story has a lot of great lessons in it. But I think the number one reason I actually love this episode is right here. When the Ganjin are telling their side of the story, this is the art style they go with, and it looks beautiful, clean, majestic. And when the Zhang tell their side of the story, the art style completely changes, and I love little details like that. Sure, the proportions are off, it's more cartoony, it's cruder, it's simpler, but it's also more expressive. Artistically, visually showing the pros and cons of both sides, which, again, they put so much thought into what most people consider to be a filler episode. Legend of Korra had a ton of production issues, and so I think that's partly why they didn't put as much time and care into literally every single episode like they did with Avatar: The Last Airbender. So definitely forgivable, but I think this is one of the reasons why it's such a beloved show. There is not a single subpar episode, in my opinion at least. When Aang is saying that he knew them, we actually get both styles simultaneously showing the exact same scene. And with Aang's little white lie, we get yet another art style. We also get memes, and who can hate that? Welcome to episode 12 of The Storm. It is backstory time. In part 1, we'll talk about Aang. In part 2, we're going to talk about Zuko. We start the episode off pretty strong with an interesting dream sequence. If a giant Momo wasn't enough, we gotta cap it all off with trauma. Aang feels guilty for running away because, remember, from Aang's perspective, there was 0 time between him running away and waking up at the South Pole. So when the series starts, as far as he's concerned, 100 years ago was yesterday. So that kind of goes to show why it's totally understandable that it didn't really click with him no matter how many reminders he got of how important things were until he got the rudest possible awakening of you have until next summer. So when Aang hears about a possible storm approaching, he is understandably anxious about that. But he also feels incredibly guilty, so when this guy accuses him of abandoning the world, he kind of feels like he did because he did abandon Gyatso and his people. Speaking of Gyatso, I have 2 questions. A lot of people have said, why are you confused about Gyatso having a statue? He was literally the greatest airbender of all time. First of all, Aang is not exactly reliable. Gyatso was his father figure. Of course he's going to think that. But also, Gyatso was not the head of this temple. This guy is. Gyatso was just his direct guardian and master. So again, why do we see a Gyatso statue, but not any of these guys with a statue? That's my question. But also, how did Aang know about the parts he wasn't there for? Another thing that really messed with Aang is something that can mess with a lot of us. These guys will not let Aang play their new game that they're using Aang's technique to play. The reason is, of course, it's unfair because he's the Avatar. But he didn't suddenly become more powerful or more talented than he already was. They just know that he's the Avatar now. So first of all, that's just inherently unfair to Aang because he has not changed, and none of these kids are realizing that. But also, if you're saying it's not fair because he's too talented, just put him on the same team as Boonju and it's balanced. Which leads me to my final question. When Aang runs away and has to go into the Avatar state to save him from the storm, why does he freeze himself? At this point in the show, the Avatar state is still treated as just a power-up when he's emotional, just a regular defense mechanism. But as retcon later, he has the knowledge and skills of all past Avatars, right? So why does he freeze himself here when he doesn't have to? Because he's in the exact same situation here, and in this case, he's able to get himself and everyone else out. So knowing that at this point it is just a power-up, is this intended to be that he has grown and matured emotionally at this point? Or is it like Katara said, and this is just his destiny, this is meant to be, he was meant to be here 100 years later? Now there is something interesting that happens with Katara in this episode, but we will talk about that when we talk about Zuko. We talked about Aang, now we're going to talk about Zuko, but first...
The world needs you now. You give people hope.
We've got our first hit on the Katara Hope-O-Meter, but here's the thing. It's not because Katara is obsessed with hope or is always prattling on about hope. That's the theme of this episode. And we're about to see that when we talk about Zuko. Zuko demands respect, but he doesn't command it. Aang shows his insecurities by running away. Zuko shows his insecurities by lashing out. But they both feel guilty and ashamed for what they've done in the past. They have both lost hope. The crew in this episode kind of acts as a stand-in for the audience because they have a similar perspective to us. Way back in the first few episodes, I mentioned how Zuko is actually a very observant and empathetic person, even now. But much like the crew here, the audience doesn't really get clued into that unless you really pay attention. Zuko has certainly learned lessons about what true confidence is, but it hasn't really clicked. He's not really naturally applying it to his life yet. As we flash back, we see him insisting on going into that war meeting. And even though he technically interrupted this guy, and by speaking out in the Fire Lord's war room, the Fire Lord is the one he, quote, really disrespected. In my eyes, what he really did was he broke a promise that he made to Iroh. He promised not to say a word. We can see here his true personality coming out. He cares about his people, he is empathetic, and he is intelligent. So both the audience and the crew are learning this for the first time, and now you see his actions in a whole new light. Zuko is stripped away of everything, and he's made to believe that it's his honor that he needs to earn back. But that's not what he really needs to heal from. No matter how intimidating the Fire Lord is, he's still Zuko's dad. Iroh knows firsthand how cruel Ozai can be. He knows how twisted that mindset can make people like Azula, like Zhao. And that manipulation has led him to think that honor is what he needs, but what he wants is his family back. And what he needs is hope.
But the important thing is, the Avatar gives Zuko hope.
So once again, it's just the theme of the episode. And after some quick lightning redirection, we see that Zuko does in fact care. He is empathetic. He does care about his crew, no matter how he might lash out through his insecurities. I also just love how every time there's two different stories being told, they always make sure that they are thematically linked in every single episode. Do you want to see an example of god-tier writing? Just make an episode where it's entirely about Aang, but all the character development and actual message of the story is about Zuko. The Blue Spirit is a fascinating case study. Ostensibly, it's a filler story about Katara and Sokka being sick and Aang going to find the cure that happens to be toads. We get to meet the Fire Nation's most wanted cat, and Aang gets captured. I'll talk a little more about Zhao in the next video, but the only thing we need to know for now is that he has been promoted to general and is taking over the hunt for the Avatar entirely. Zuko is almost immediately put in a corner at the beginning of the episode. Just like I mentioned in part 9 of this series, yeah, all the way back then, Zuko from the beginning was a three-dimensional character. One of his defining character traits, believe it or not, is that he is a people person and that he is very empathetic. When we first see him in the show, we see him post-trauma and he really hasn't begun to heal yet. But thanks to Zhao, he's getting a lot of eye-opening experiences, and he's getting his choice taken away from him. He has to start taking risks and start looking at things in a different way in order to capture the Avatar. Which brings us squarely to the Blue Spirit. In order to capture the Avatar, he has to save the Avatar. That he's not only protecting his identity, he is kind of making this facade of someone who's kind of on the Avatar's side. But you know what they say, fake it till you make it. He was so determined to hide his identity that he never once firebended as the Blue Spirit. So even though we only see Zuko at the beginning and the end of the episode, this episode is really about him. If we didn't get Zuko's backstory in the episode immediately before this episode, this would have hit completely different. When Aang realizes this was Zuko, he has this kind of moment of connection. He talked about his friend Kuzan and wondered if maybe were things a little different, maybe they could have been friends. Zuko lashes out at him, and then there's a moment. Now, all Zuko does is slightly raise his eyebrow. But when I first watched this episode, and even to this day, I just feel in my heart as if he's about to just say, yeah, maybe. This would have been just a throwaway moment had we not just seen his full backstory last episode. But despite the fact that he is still traumatized, he is still hunting the Avatar, we are seeing that empathy from back then creep its way back into his mind. Like I mentioned in part 9, he's a very observant person because he naturally has a lot of empathy. If you've ever been through trauma or you've known someone who's gone through trauma, you know what it's like to see someone who has completely changed start to become their old selves again, and in a very beautiful way, that's what's happening with Zuko. But now it's time to talk about Zhao. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Zhao is the perfect example of why arrogance is a false confidence, not an overabundance of confidence. It is no mistake that this infantry captain is noticeably shorter than Zhao, because this guy has real confidence. For all of Zhao's posturing, he cannot stand up to true confidence and true authority. For all his bravado, Zhao is being called out immediately on his crap. It takes literally becoming an admiral to get his way. His power is not his own. He is constantly relying on the power of his position to get what he wants. He does not have true confidence and he does not have true charisma. Without his station, he would be nothing. And every time he gloats like this is not for the sake of Aang. This is for his own ego boost to keep himself feeling confident. If he didn't do this constantly, he would start to realize the power that he is truly lacking. And that strain to always have to prove yourself to others and to yourself is what makes personality types like this so explosive when they get even the slightest bit upset. I mean, like, he could have just waited before telling the troops. He could have just waited until he was actually taking Aang to the Fire Lord. But no, he had to tell everyone immediately, hey, we captured the Avatar. I captured the Avatar. Didn't go too well, did it? Before we go to the next episode, just 2 more points about the Blue Spirit. Fight scenes are cool, but not seeing the fight scene is usually more impressive. This is such an action movie and horror movie trope to not show the villain or the fight or what have you. And in a lot of cases, it's to save budget or because they don't think they can make it look as good as they want it to. But there's also the fact that it is way more intimidating when you don't see it. When you don't see the fight going down, you see a couple plumes of fire and you hear the sounds of fighting and then silence. It lets both the audience and the characters' imaginations run wild with how cool that must have been. But even if you don't need to save budget and you know that your choreography or your animation is good enough to hold up, you should still use a trope like this for a character intro because it just communicates such power to the audience. Speaking of communicating to the audience, let's talk about it. If we're going to go by my theory that Momo is kind of the representation of the air nomads and, more importantly, the representation of the true path of Aang and therefore, by extension, the gang, when Momo brings Katara the crown, this is obviously letting us, the audience, know that they are truly royalty. I don't know why you're fighting me on this. Sorry, I had to. That joke was just sitting right there. That being said, this scene is right after we meet Miyuki, the Fire Nation's most wanted cat, and now Momo is bringing a dead mouse like a cat would. I mean, yes, once again, haha funny, good funny Momo scene, but is it? Is this a mistake? Is this just happenstance? Or are they once again paralleling Aang with Momo? Getting back to fighting, these guys are probably the coolest antagonists we have had so far, and we never see them again. Also, can we petition to have Go Kick Rocks or Go Suck an Egg to be changed to Go Suck a Toad? Avatar has some of the best voice acting I have ever heard in my life. You know, aside from scenes like this.
He's taunting us. You are so gonna be dinner.
I don't think I have ever heard a line in all of Avatar that sounded more like Guy reading script in studio than that read from Sokka right there. Also, why is this fish cooler than me? That's just not fair. And you might be inclined to think, well, Josh, this is the Fortune Teller episode. That's another filler episode, and you'd be wrong, yet again. But even if it was filler, it still contains vital information for figuring out our grand unified theory of bending, so let's go over it. Look at these twins here. There's an earth-bending brother and a non-bending brother. How? If they are identical twins, then they must have the exact same genetics, right? Sort of. So for all intents and purposes, identical twins are basically just clones of each other from the genetic standpoint. So does that mean that bending can't have anything to do with genetics? Not necessarily. So even though technically they have all the same genetic makeup, the parts of their genes that are turned on and off might be different. In the study of epigenetics, that studies where certain genes are turned on or off by little chemical markers along the DNA strand. This is why even though all of your cells throughout your body have all the exact same DNA information, they form differently and they create different proteins and different chemicals in the cell. Certain parts, the red blood cell parts are turned off to make it a neuron. The neuron parts are shut off to make it a skin cell, and so on and so forth. But environmental factors can also affect certain genes turning on or off. This is why sometimes you can see people go through dramatic physical changes when they go through a very traumatic part of their life. Some of their genetics are literally turning on or off and changing how they physically appear, whether that be their hair, their skin tone, their number of freckles, anything like that. So it's entirely possible that bending is strictly genetic, and one brother just has the gene turned on and the other has the gene turned off just due to, slightly different environmental factors. But we don't have anything else to go off of as far as genetics, at least right now. So what is the other possible explanation for identical twins, one being a bender and one not being a bender? Well, here's a theory. They both have the bending gene, and it is turned on for both. So why is one an earthbender and the other isn't? The answer is chi. Now, most people are already aware that chi has at least something to do with bending because when your chi is blocked, you can't bend anymore. And one of my working theories is that the elements themselves have a very particular kind of chi, or perhaps are even made out of chi, if that makes sense. That little throwaway statement probably requires its own video at some point, so I'll circle back to that eventually. But think of it this way, why can earthbenders only bend earth? Why can firebenders only bend fire? More importantly, if we go off of the retcon that bending was given to people by the lion turtles, then the bending that's passed on is just the particular kind of bending that was bestowed upon them through energy bending by the lion turtles. So what if the genetics only determine whether you can or cannot be a bender? And what determines what you bend is the balance of chi inside yourself. So you have your personal chi, which let's just say is colorless, and then you have your elemental chi, which has the associated color with your element, in this case, green. So the mother and father pass on their genes, but they also pass on their chi energies to their children while the children are inside the womb. But because it's not strictly genetic, and one type of chi will eventually try to overtake the other, in this theory at least, earthbending chi overtook the colorless personal chi in one, but not the other, because maybe there was a slightly larger amount that just happened to be on his side of the womb, if you will. Or maybe because they were so close together, one side started to take on more and more green from the other, and the other started to take more and more of the colorless chi, and it just kind of balanced out in a yin-yang sort of way. It's a work in progress, and there's still a lot more evidence that we need to really know either way, but what do you think of that theory?
My pronouns are he, not him. Because I'll never be him.
I have a question. Is Aunt Wu a real fortune teller? How can you even tell what a real fortune teller is? We can start by talking about what fake fortune tellers do to fake their fortune-telling prowess. Most people will tell you about 2 kinds of reading. I will tell you about 3. Most people talk about cold reading and hot reading, but there is something in between that I like to call warm reading. Cold reading is just throwing stuff out there to see what sticks and letting everyone else kind of fill in the gaps. Hot reading is when you just straight up have the information right in front of you, or in your earpiece in some cases, and you are pretending that it is a psychic revelation, right? But warm reading is when you have some information and then have to intuit or deduce the rest of the information. A great example where she unabashedly warm read someone was Sokka. She was literally just like, I don't need to read your palms, I can tell already, you're going to have a lot of trouble and strife in your life, and most of it will be self-inflicted because, I mean, just look at the way you're acting. But she wasn't being dishonest about that, so are her actual fortune-telling skills legit? When it comes to things like cold reading, there's a lot of use of what's called Barnum statements. A good example of a Barnum statement is a statement that's just kind of true for everyone, or even something that is just straight up vague enough to mean literally anything you want to interpret it as. So something that's true for everyone, and also very vague, is, I can see that finances have been on your mind recently. If you really want to cast a really wide net, you can say something to the effect of, I can tell that you enjoy being on your own at times, but with the right people, you quite enjoy company. That is vague and applies to basically everyone, but the part of that you latch onto, the being alone or the spending time with people, is going to inform the person doing the cold reading a little bit more about you, and as they start to warm up the reading, they can then get more and more specific. And there is a time when Aunt Wu does this. When Aunt Wu tells Aang, if you follow your heart, you will be with the one you love, that is just vague, true advice for anyone. But once again, this comes off the heels of her going, holy crap, you're about to be in one of the greatest, biggest, most important battles in all of history, and your fate is entwined with the fate of the world. And we can visibly see that this is a very dramatic reading, and her reactions are very genuine seeming. The only reason that she gives this kind of Barnum statement to Aang is because he specifically said, well, what about my love life? I don't care about destiny. So, in a way, once again, we are being shown this is not her psychic power, but this first part is. But is it? I mean, it's been kind of a crapshoot so far with who can tell if Aang is the Avatar just by looking at him, but I'm pretty sure Aunt Wu is intelligent enough to notice the arrows and probably figure out, yeah, even if he's not the Avatar, this kid's definitely an airbender. So is this more like warm reading, where she is taking the little information that she knows that, yeah, that's probably the Avatar, and extrapolate into, well, there's this big war, he's obviously going to be involved here. So here's how we're going to know for sure. Books. The key to understanding Aunt Wu and whether or not she's a real fortune teller lies right here. In the last video, we talked about how she might be using observational tactics and cold reading tactics to kind of imply that she has some kind of greater understanding or some kind of psychic ability. But when she's reading the clouds, we can see the clouds that she's reading. So we know she's not lying. These are obviously the exact things that she's quoting from her little book here. And guess what? She's quoting it from a book. It's not coming from her interpretation. It is coming from this exact book of symbols in the clouds. Just like a lot of people use little booklets when they're reading tea leaves or doing tarot and stuff like that, she is going off of exactly what this book is saying, and we know this for sure because Aang steals it later, and they can read the exact meaning of a type of cloud, and she understands what it means precisely. So she might not believe that she has psychic powers, or she might believe that she has psychic powers, but what she does believe is destiny and symbols in nature. Because both of her divining strategies have to do with nature. One is through the clouds, and the other is through cracks in bones. So does Aunt Wu have some special gift, or is she just a very observant person, and that led her to observing these effects in nature and either jotting it down and recording it, or finding a book of symbols that already existed and using her special, ability to be a very observant person to be the best at interpreting them. But there's something else at play here too. When Sokka tries to convince these people that she's a fraud, he points out this guy's shoes. This guy was told that he would meet his one true love when he was wearing red shoes. So he's been wearing these suckers every single day. So obviously he's going to meet his one true love while he's wearing those shoes if he is always wearing those shoes. And that leads to another trick that's not necessarily cold reading, but it is a way to guarantee perceived results. On the one hand, it does seem kind of underhanded and like trickery. But we do know that Aunt Wu has a big heart, and if she really feels like she can tell a little white lie to make someone feel better, she's probably going to. But by always wearing these red shoes, this becomes a reminder that he will one day meet his one true love, and so he is going to be more aware of when opportunities arise for that to happen. So while it seems like trickery, this is actually the point of the entire episode. If you're observant, you can tell what's going to happen, but you can also make it happen. Aunt Wu shows both sides of this immediately. She shows that by being observant, she can kind of predict the future because she knows what to look for and she is paying attention. But at the same time, she is giving advice that is going to allow people to manifest that destiny for themselves and kind of put them in the driver's seat whether they realize it or not. If someone just said, follow your heart and you will be with the one you love, you'd be like, yeah, sure, whatever. But if a soothsayer told you that, someone you truly believed could see the future, that would change your entire way of life. You would pay more attention to your heart, to your passions, to your subconscious, more so than you would have before, and that wouldn't happen if you either knew that they were a fraud or didn't think that they had any kind of special powers. So is Aunt Wu a psychic? Maybe, but the point of the episode is to be observant of the world around you and to make your own destiny. The messaging, the attention to detail, like episodes like this are what make the show so amazing. Geez, who directed this? Yeah, of course it was you, Dave. There are two main interpretations you can have of what Aunt Wu is doing in the fortune teller episode. One of them with a lot of evidence is this one here. She doesn't predict the future, she controls it. That comment is talking about this fine gentleman right here. So is her fortune telling predicting the future, or is she making the future happen? Spoiler, it's technically both. When we first see this guy, he's dodging and weaving like it's nothing. It kind of makes me think of that Harry Potter potion, like the Felix something. I think it's like Felix Felicis, something like that. But the main interpretation of how that potion works, if I remember correctly, was that it basically kind of just gives you an extreme boost of confidence, and with that confidence comes you just manifesting your success that you would have had anyway, as long as you had that confidence. So you could argue that his safety was guaranteed because of the confidence that he was given by Aunt Wu, by her telling him his travels would be safe. But without Aang and the gang being there to save him, who's to say that he would have actually survived that encounter to the very end? Or for that matter, what if there was a rock slide or lightning struck him or anything? There is strong evidence that Aunt Wu uses this tactic of giving people the confidence they need to make their destiny happen. However, I think it's also the case that she is really predicting the future. Like, sure, you can know that it's going to rain simply by looking at the sky and watching how the clouds are moving. But why would she predict that the travelers he meets on the way would need this package and not him? And how could she possibly know that he would be okay when literally anything can happen when you are walking by yourself on the road? When she's divining the clouds like someone would divine tea leaves in a cup, she is going off of a book. And a lot of this is just way too specific. The same commenter goes on to say that because she predicted it this way, it forced Sokka and Aang to go check on the volcano. But it didn't. Sokka was helping Aang find panda lilies. They just happened to stumble across the volcano. But you could also say that Aang was predictively programmed by saying, you must follow your heart and you will be with the one you love. But at that point, we are getting into like Moriarty levels of predictive programming and pre-planning. Because then we also have to say, okay, does she already know that either Aang has feelings for Katara or that Katara might have some repressed feelings for Aang? Because why else would she say, you will love a very powerful bender? Now, granted, that could just be a read on her personality and going, yeah, she would not settle for any less, but still. And speaking of love predictions, she was also very specific with Mang. She was told her one true love would have big ears. But we don't see any other people in the village who have big ears, and so she latches on to Aang. And while we don't ever see that she actually meets that big-eared boy somewhere down the line, that is a very specific prediction. I think she is very intelligent and very observant, like detective levels observant. I think now that I've gone through this a few times, I really do think that her fortune-telling is actual, like, mystical fortune-telling. You know, it's not psychic powers per se, but it's basically saying that in this world, things like reading clouds or reading bones are legit. And speaking of detective skills, Sokka is the Sherlock Holmes of Avatar, and I will not hear any different. The writers could have easily just taken this scene where they find the blade and go, oh, wow, let's go to the shore and see if there are some boats, and then there's some boats there. But instead, we get Detective Sokka on the case. And he is able to give us almost a play-by-play of exactly what went down. He is a really good tracker. I think what I love the most about this is we're not technically seeing character development, we are just getting more and more of his intellect revealed over time. When we first see him in episode 1, he's kind of a ditz. Like, he is doing his absolute best, and he is doing a pretty good job, all things considered. But it's like with every episode, we get to see more and more of his intelligence, and he's not growing in intelligence, we're just seeing more of it, and I love it. And yet again, we see an episode where there is a common thread between our heroes and the villains. Because while Sokka can track a scuffle all the way to the shore, we come into contact with yet another tracker. And I mean, Iroh's certainly impressed. But instead of great detective skills, we have smell-o-vision. And I hate that she really doesn't show up until Book 3 again, but this is a great example of exactly the plot point we will see in Book 3, where Aang is nowhere to be found. Like, they are tracking them all over. They track them down to the herbalist in Miyuki, the Fire Nation's most wanted feline. They track them to the fortune teller from last episode, who lets Iroh know that he is handsome, because she has excellent taste. I mean, this smell-o-vision is so precise, it was going in circles when Aang was going in circles. And that's all from a scroll that Aang had for like, what, a day? But that's all from the nature of the kind of animal that it is. So Sokka wins this round. Here's a scene in Avatar that is still being debated to this day. People got very upset when I mentioned that Iroh has a long way to go in Book 1. He does have growth and he does have a character arc despite the fact that yes, he is still the wisest person on the show so far, but he's not perfect. Now some of this can be chalked up to the fact that the entire story was not already written out and they were making changes on the fly even in Season 1. Originally, it was only supposed to be 12 episodes, not 20. So a question a lot of people are asking about Iroh. Is Iroh a creep? This clip is like, what, 2 seconds, 5 seconds long? People say that he really crosses a line by pretending to be paralyzed here. And the obvious intention is just to be a funny scene, right? But a lot of people say that this is out of character for Iroh. You know, completely glossing over the fact that he just stole perfume because it smelled nice. So while this is technically a bad thing to do, people are saying that this scene right here, this 2 to 5 second scene right here, is SA. Now, when I was a kid, and still mostly to this day, I just see this as, if it's going to happen, I'm going to let this happen, don't take this from me. But I can see where people are coming from because of just the overt lack of consent. So here's the burning question. Do you think they were just still working on what they wanted his character to be and that changed over the course of the next couple books? Or do you think this is still in character for him? I don't think the creators have ever commented on this scene, so we may never know for sure, so it's really all going to be up to our interpretation. What is the moral to the story of this episode? Remember, this is still a kid show, and a lot of these episodes have a moral at the end. Well, this episode is all about trust. Now, we can talk about him huffing and puffing and going off before hearing that they're not actually going to leave him. But Sokka and Katara were very much being rude and dismissive of Aang this entire time. You could kind of forgive his reaction here. If he was not thinking any clearer than he was right here, he would have easily just thrown this map away, but thankfully he doesn't. He's upset, but there's still some part of him that understands that hiding this from Sokka and Katara is wrong. Like, they were rude to him, but he is now betraying their trust. So when they do Sokka's rite of passage here with the rock dodging, Aang gets a first-hand glimpse of what it means to be trustworthy and why it's so important to always be someone that you can trust. To the extent that he is given the honor of being trustworthy and immediately going, I can't do this anymore. So much like Aang had every right to be upset earlier, despite the fact that he missed a very important part of the conversation by leaving, Sokka and Katara are very much in the right to be upset right here. So being trustworthy is very important, but forgiving friends and family for making a mistake is just as important. This episode even visually shows that regaining your feeling or regaining your trust is important and a net good, even though it can hurt sometimes.
I'm starting to get some feeling back. Ow.
Okay, I know, that's just a funny scene I'm overanalyzing. I'm letting my MatPat show. But my friends, never be afraid to let your MatPat show. Overanalyzing is half the fun. Going to a firebending festival right after you see your wanted posters for the first time is a bold move. Also, other than references and conversation, this is pretty much the only time we see Zuko this entire episode. Thankfully, Appa is really good at hiding and has this perfect natural camouflage. And once again, I really need to bring up how oblivious people in the Fire Nation are. Because Sokka and Katara have these cloaks, right? And Aang is just going to go like this, as if they didn't think, while they're getting supplies, maybe get him a cloak too, just in case. Like, buddy, your wanted poster is right there. Maybe putting a different color on, possibly. But it's okay, because nobody notices. Again, literally, nobody notices. But thankfully, this kind of festival is the kind where everyone's wearing a mask, so that really... Hang on, sorry. Something's not right. Give me a second. There we go. Okay, so now the gang has masks, and it's a little easier. Still, change the color, please. Also, if someone has a recipe for flaming fireflakes, these look amazing. Also, with our bad luck with these live actions, can we just have an Avatar puppet show at this point? We'd even watch an Ember Islands player's satirical take for the entire series. Like, how much fun would that be to watch the entire show through Fire Nation propaganda puppets? Also, hi Scott Menville. This is already his second appearance as a bit character in the show, and I really wish we had more of him. Like, I know a lot of us have trouble separating his voice from Dick Grayson or Robin, but that's half the fun, you know? When you hear him in something, you're like, hey, Robin! But also, Aang. You're in hiding. Stop it. Literally, just wearing your normal clothes and a mask, people are going to know that it's you. At the very least, it looks like it's not just Fire Nation soldiers who can't tell obvious acting. Because, buddy, hey, dude, it's a show. You know it's a show. Come on. But we gotta get the plot moving somehow, don't we? So after a brilliant display of fireworks, we will finally be able to meet Zhong Zhong the Deserter. And we definitely have some things to talk about. Let's talk about Zhong Zhong the Deserter. At this point, a lot of us in the audience, especially when the show was first coming out, we were wondering, how is he going to learn firebending when the Fire Nation is filled with bad guys? Now, they've already gone out of their way to show that, the Fire Nation is filled with people, regular people, so at some point, of course, you're going to meet someone who's not going to be a bad guy, right? Enter Zhong Zhong the Deserter. He refuses to train Aang because he has not mastered water and earth yet. Now, first of all, why is that important? And second of all, how does he know? Now, we're told he could tell because of, quote, the way you walked into camp, but what does that mean? Bending the different elements requires different bending philosophies, and so therefore, you as a person would move differently. But for our purposes here, this shows us that Zhong Zhong definitely knows what he's doing. We'll get more in depth about this later, but there's something that I learned called the 5 elements training method. And while it's not exactly a one-for-one parallel to how the elements are treated in Avatar, the base concept is the same. When learning water bending, you're learning fluidity. When learning earth bending, you're learning discipline and strength. To properly firebend, you will need discipline, strength, and fluidity. So it's not just that fire is dangerous, but there are reasons why you want to learn the elements in order. But like I said, we will talk about this a lot more in another video. And he is very much correct in that Aang is in no way ready to learn firebending. He even demonstrates how incredibly powerful and how dangerous fire actually is. With this plume of fire in an enclosed space, sure, he's under control, but even with that being under control, that is a risky move. Which begs the question, why did Roku randomly appear to tell Zhong Zhong to train Aang? Now, we'll get into a discussion about the Avatar state at a later time, but this is literally something that theoretically could only happen on the solstice or while in the Avatar state, right? So him appearing here must be difficult for Roku's spirit. And Aang clearly has no idea that Roku did this at all. And Roku should know that Aang is not ready and that he needs to master the other elements before fire. So why? I'm not just saying that rhetorically. I literally have zero idea why Roku decided it was a good idea to convince Zhong Zhong to teach Aang, knowing full well that he is not ready for it. One possible explanation is maybe he knows that Aang needs to learn this lesson. And then the other would just be to move the plot of the episode along. And I really don't know. I'm going to make 2 more videos about this episode. We're going to talk about that 5 elements training modality because I think it's really interesting, and then we're going to talk about Zhao. And you should all know at this point what that video is going to be about. Why is it important for Aang to learn the elements in the correct order? As I expected, I did get a little bit of pushback on that, but that is why we're making this its own video. To address the number one reaction people have, yes, largely the reason the Avatar learns in the order that he does is because that happens to be the order in which the Avatar is reincarnated. So it goes water, earth, fire, air. Water, earth, fire, air. Now, if this was a one-to-one with that 5 elements training method I mentioned last video, it would be much easier for me to explain, and we'll get into that in just a second. But the people leaving comments like this do have a point. Aang's issue with fire is not like his issue with his, quote, opposite of earth. It's not that he can't, it's that when he does, he has no control. So specifically for an airbender, it's important to learn control of a more finite element like water, and then learn strength and discipline through earth that will then allow you to properly use fire. Because Aang is coming at this with a sense of freedom and just letting his air out, and he really cannot be doing that with fire. While that is pretty unique to airbenders, I think we can lay out a solid foundation of why that's helpful to other elements as well. If you start with water, you still need that additional strength and discipline to use fire. Not as much as an airbender needs it, but you still need it. And an earthbender going from something rigid, hard, and linear to something a little bit more fluid while still strong and powerful like fire makes it a little easier to move on to water or air. But that is kind of where it starts to break down because you don't necessarily need to learn air, then water, or water, then air, as long as you learn fire before those. So it's not as big a deal as it is for, say, again, an airbender. But what is this real-world 5 elements training method I'm talking about? It's not like a specific martial art, it's not specific techniques or whatever, it is a method of training within martial arts that I found very helpful. These elements in order are earth, water, fire, air, void. It's pretty easy to see where it came from too, because it very clearly mirrors the natural training method that people simply normally go through when learning a martial art. As you start in a martial art, you start with your basics, your stances, and building a solid core, and then you move on to more advanced techniques where you get a little fancier footwork, and then you get into the more advanced techniques and so on and so forth. So the 5 elements add on top of that a philosophy. This philosophy allows you to have a groundwork to build on for a lifelong martial arts journey. At the beginning, when you're building your bases, you're building your core strength, and you're doing your, simple punches, simple blocks, low, deep stances. We call that earth. What's cool is you can start to learn more advanced techniques in this early stage than you normally do when you treat it as earth. Because a lot of times in things like karate, taekwondo, tongsido, they don't teach elbow strikes until a little bit later, but you can teach them right here because it is fundamentally not that different from throwing a straight punch if you just throw a straight elbow. And it fits within the element, so you can start to add in more advanced things earlier on while training in earth. When you start adding in things like circular footwork, dodging, parrying, that's when you start getting into water and you start learning how to truly get your kinesthetic awareness and truly use your body. And again, if there are techniques that are more advanced but fit within this same philosophy of water, you can start to train them in this area, which is normally like orange belts, green belts, whatever your system uses at that stage. And then once you have both a strong core and fluidity, you can start to add in more, let's say, aggression and high-flying tactics. So your spinning kicks, your more aggressive throws, things like that, some of your more advanced techniques that you have avoided in earth and water are fire. But this is where it starts to become more and more obvious that this is more a philosophy than it is a strict training method. Because a lot of the things that you're practicing in the fire section are things you could have already been practicing in earth and water. So it really is a philosophy of the training. You are training more aggressively because you have more of a base and you have more of a repertoire of techniques at this point. You need to learn how to press your advantage in combat. And once we've mastered that, we get to air. With fire, you should have been able to add a lot more speed than you had in earth or water, but using all of these techniques together to simply avoid getting hit and maybe punching here or there just to dissuade, much like the wind blows dust in your eyes but does not rush you over like a wave does or crumble you like a landslide. Wind is again a philosophy of you have the techniques, now learn how to use them appropriately without hurting people. And again, you can start to learn more advanced things, but most of it should be things you have already learned, just doing them, better. Which finally leads us to void or nothingness, the fifth element. This is the ultimate goal of all martial arts, the idea being you don't have to fight in the first place. But most importantly, you have to be able to fight in order to truly manifest the ideal that is void. You have to be able to fight to know for sure that you are not fighting because you shouldn't be fighting, rather than you're not fighting because you can't fight. Because sometimes you need to fight, and if you can't, you're screwed. Another thing I love about this training method is once you go through at least up to fire, you can start to prefer a style, if you will. Because these philosophies are universal and stick with you outside of this training method, and so your way of fighting or your way of training or your way of performing or whatever it is that you're doing can be related to the philosophies of these different elements. Since I haven't trained anyone in a long time and I haven't trained myself in a long time, I'm probably going to restart at Earth and build up from there. And that's going to be my way to get back into the martial arts that I've left to the side since the beginning of COVID, really. Would have been a lot easier if this was just a straight up one-to-one comparison, but hopefully this all makes a little more sense now. I was going to wait until I was off work, but I cannot wait. This comment blew my mind. So some of the comments on this video talked about how Roku probably had his own ego issues, and like even in the afterlife, Roku is not a perfect person, which I absolutely love and really goes with the themes of Avatar. But I kind of like this theory more. What if Zhang is just crazy? Like what if his solitude after deserting kind of drove him nuts? In a way, this is kind of his own inner voice telling him, hey, give it a try, why don't you go for it? But it's like a full-on hallucination. On a similar note, though, did Aang go into the Avatar, like if it really was Roku, did Aang go into the Avatar state? Or is it just like, was it just like mentally projected into Zhang's head, in which case I still feel like that's really like hallucination-y, right? I genuinely don't know which idea I feel is more correct, but I do know which one I like more at this point. Because that would give us two members of the White Lotus who are absolutely balls to the wall nuts. But Zhang at the very least has the appearance of being all together, right? I don't know, what do you think? When Zhang was talking about his student with no control, we know he was talking about Zhao. But they just had to be sure that they knew that we knew. One of the core parts of the story in this episode is discipline and control. On the one hand, we see Aang's impatience, and while we as an audience know that he's in the wrong for it, we also kind of just want to see him firebend, because that'd be cool, right? So when he finally does, we're excited for just a split second until we realize he's going too far, and he hurts Katara. And I do have some really big questions about healing with waterbending, but we will attack that another day. We'll get to Zhao in just a second, but I just want to point out Zhang's wall of fire here. Because for all his talk about discipline, restraint, and control, this is the ultimate example of restraint and control, because the fire is going only where he wants the fire to go. He's not throwing fire out and hoping it hits something. He is specifically restraining it to this exact area. When Zhang Zhang says he is all about control, he is not kidding. But now that he's gone with his little vanishing trick, we can talk about Zhao. I have said time and time again, Zhao has a false confidence driven by ego and insecurity. We have seen before, his confidence really only comes from his mastery of firebending and his military position. We have seen his confidence drain away simply because he couldn't outrank someone, which means the confidence is not real. So when Aang finally realizes that Zhao has no control, he takes advantage of this. So not only is this a cool moment, we actually see the point where Aang grows as he learns from Zhao's mistakes and Zhao's ego. Because Aang was having his own ego issues. Comments in other videos mentioned how Roku was like, I have learned in 1,000 lifetimes and I will learn once again. Like, Roku potentially has some ego issues too. But now we have a visual representation of the issues that an out-of-control ego can cause. I said it before and I will say it again, this is what I love about this show. The art direction in Avatar is amazing. Yes, we will get to the Mechanist in the next video, but first I really want to talk about the artwork. If you can't tell, this right here is 3D. I feel like we can skip past it a little bit sometimes, but there was a lot of really well done integration of 3D into 2D in the original Avatar. Believe it or not, it was going to be much more prominent usage originally, but they decided not to. We'll get more into that when we talk about the unaired pilot episode, because their commentary track does talk about that. But the fact that it's overlooked is just a testament to how well it was blended in. There are so many scenes that feel like they just don't happen in animations today, at least not ones that go on American television. Look at the blending of the colors, the color palette, the lighting that they have that looks like it fits within the world, like you don't see the animation, you just see the scene, if that makes sense. And maybe there are productions that use this really well today, and either I've missed it or I just don't watch those shows, but I feel like this is something that is really kind of lost with how many animated shows are coming out one after the other after the other. Like, the loss of artistry is probably more to do with the fact that we're pumping out a crap ton, and you want everything, all the cool things that you're going to have in there completely visible at all times, and I don't know, I feel like it's just, the vibe isn't the same. Or maybe it's just the fact that the art direction of Avatar was already a step above what happened before, and clearly it's still going to be in the top tier of all animated shows for the foreseeable future. Because once again, we get shots like this.
But Josh, that's just a white screen. What the hell are you talking about?
If you don't see where I'm going with this yet, let me show you one frame before this white screen. This is an explosion. This is the exact same animation technique they used when Aang exploded that fireball just a few episodes ago. So if you ever feel like it just hits harder in animation than it does in live action for big impacts or explosion, this is why. Just a simple white screen is enough to really sell that impact, and it's there for 1 or 2 frames. Live action does not have the freedom to do this because I feel like maybe people would notice it more, but maybe we should be doing this in live action. Maybe next time myself or someone else is making some kind of skit where there's an explosion, put a couple of just full white screens in there and just see what happens. Because it's so simple, and yet someone made the conscious decision, this is what we need to make this more impactful. Because they could have just continued to show this footage and not cut away to the white part. Like, this is a good looking explosion. Most animations today would probably just show the explosion and not have a couple of white frames. But by adding those in, it adds just enough impact to make you feel it more than just see it. We're talking about an animated show on Nickelodeon in 2005 with a Gaussian blur to make this a cinematic, impactful action scene. I love this show. Okay, now we can talk about the Mechanist. Now, Rene Auberjonois might be on Scott Menville levels up, I know who that is, but I don't think I have ever once heard a single voice acting performance where I wasn't like, that was amazing. Like, no matter what character he's playing, he is that character. You know it's Rene Auberjonois, or at least you know the voice, but he is that character, and I don't know how else to describe that. But back to the Mechanist himself. There's an interesting through line of this whole episode of preserving the sanctity of the past, but also not allowing that to destroy your future. The Mechanist is pushing through without a second thought about so much of this history that really needs to be preserved. But if it were up to Aang, this would all just be left here to stand in memoriam. All of this space would effectively go to waste because there are no air nomads there to live in it. So as always, the answer is somewhere in the middle. First, we have to allow Aang to come to terms with the fact that new people live here now. And like he put at the end of the episode, it's like a hermit crab. You weren't born here, but you took this empty shell, emphasis on empty, and you made it your home. But right after that, he does effectively let some of this empty shell go to waste by saying, no, I'm not going to go in there, I'm just going to leave it be because no one's touched it and no one will ever touch it again. So sure, if I put the Mona Lisa in a coffin and I buried it and locked it up and put cement over that, no one would ever touch it again, but what would the point of it be? But as Aang points out, a lot of these places that they have smashed through are showing the history of the airbenders, so that is being lost for the sake of progress because no one is there to say, whoa, not here. So once again, we have phenomenal writing. All the way down to the gray area where under duress, the Mechanist is actually building technology for the Fire Nation. And we will absolutely talk about the technology in the next episode, but I just want to talk about the writing here. Because while obviously that is wrong to be making things for the Fire Nation, it's still a gray area because he is protecting his son and his people. And Aang is not listening to any of that. So even though what the Mechanist is doing is wrong, Aang's reaction is also wrong. Like he knows he's doing a bad thing, he just feels like he has no choice. I swear to God, who wrote this episode? Okay, so it's written by Elizabeth Ahaz, head writer Aaron Ahaz. We know all... Dave! As promised, let's talk about that technology. Why is it that we can see steampunk tech here, but hate it in Korra? We've talked about this before, but rewatching this episode really helped me kind of come to terms with the exact reason why some, not all, but some fans looked at the technology in Legend of Korra and it immediately turned them off from the show. Some people liked the technology right off the bat and never had a problem with it. Others, like myself, had a knee-jerk reaction, but then got used to it because, it made sense. But here's how this technology felt in the original show. Most of the show, with the exception of the Fire Nation, is fairly technologically primitive, like medieval Asia levels of technology. I know there was like clockwork in ancient China and stuff like that, but like disregarding that, the feel is kind of the medieval-ish fantasy setting. And it's a lot like a D&D campaign set in something like the Forgotten Realms. You might have an artificer character, but that is not necessarily the norm when comparing it to the rest of the realm. So let's say you're going through your campaign with your magical characters, your monk, your, cleric. What would Katara be? You are aboard your flying steed. And in your travels, you come across a crazy inventor. You see bits and pieces of interesting technology along the way, but for the most part, the greatest source of, steampunk tech that you see is this artificer right here. So when you go to your next campaign after this one is finished and it's set in the same setting, you don't expect it to all of a sudden be 1940s New York. Logically speaking, the technology makes sense. The progression is very much a believable progression of technology, but when we're talking about storytelling, it can be jarring. But at the same time, hopefully this will help some of you who still don't like the tech in Korra think about it this way. This is like World War I tech. I mean, really, it does not get any more steampunk than this. And for all this interesting hydraulics and steampunk, they're still using firebending for their main ammunition. But look at this scene in Book 1 and tell me that doesn't look like a fantasy version of a World War I battle. So in a way, we're almost going from 1910s to 1940s in 70 years. But back on the defense of the haters, I can also understand that this is the exception in Avatar. Technology was cool and new and sparse. But in Korra, it was common and ubiquitous. So while logically it makes sense, there is a reason why it didn't jive with people on the emotional level when they first saw it. I'm just hoping we can have a real conversation about this when I do get to Korra and not just shouting each other down. Like, guys, I get it, I love it too, and that's why we're all so passionate in our responses to these, is because we love this franchise. But please, let's be nice to each other. We are finally at the Northern Water Tribe. Let's talk technology. A lot of comments in my videos talking about tech and Avatar talk about this. Basically, after a century-long war, they're finally sharing both resources and technology that they've developed over these last 100 years, and there was a huge boom. And that is mostly correct. One of the reasons Avatar always felt fantastical was how technology in certain ways wasn't needed. Particularly not needed by the Earth Kingdom or the Water Tribes. Why invent a whole new gate and portcullis system when you have waterbenders who can just do this? Because once people go through, they can literally just, pull it right back up. It's the same with the Earth Kingdom. It can even innovate in technology like this mail system here that hasn't been updated in 100 years. Because you don't need to upgrade it because you have the Earthbenders. It's really just the Air Nomads and the Fire Nation that can't really create new structures with their bending. And the Air Nomads are monks, so they have no reason to technologically advance, so it's really only the Fire Nation that needs to advance their technology. So yes, it is absolutely accurate to say that the transfer of technology was stagnated because of the isolationism and, of course, the war. But simply because of the nature of fire and the type of technology they were driven to build, the Fire Nation was the only place really developing that kind of technology that would eventually be usable by non-benders. Because aside from that, we just have outliers like the Mechanist in the Earth Kingdom. So in a lot of ways, I feel like just the fact that they can bend in and of itself delayed the growth of technology. And this kind of technology-adjacent bending system is what a lot of people were expecting to continue more so than it did. Now, granted, in Korra, we start out in Republic City, and that is a very different place, and they make very clearly that, wow, this is out of the norm for Korra in the first couple episodes, but still the vibe is drastically shifted at the very inception of Korra. So once again, I have not read the comics, so if the comics prove me wrong, just let me know. But so far as I know, Sokka and the Mechanist are simply exceptions. There are hardly any people in the Water Tribes or the Earth Kingdom who feel the need to make a non-bending based technology because of how ubiquitous bending is in a lot of these places. So it's Sokka, the Mechanist, and the Fire Nation. When you can build all of this with just bending, who can blame you, honestly? Let's talk about water bending and healing. I don't have a firm grasp of how I feel this fits into the grand unified theory of bending, so maybe y'all can help me. I just want to get my thoughts out there and maybe we can kind of figure it out together. So before Ty Lee is even a thought in the creators' minds, we already have the chi pathways mapped out here. One thing we know for sure is that chi is an important part of bending. We know that when your chi is blocked, you cannot bend, and therefore it must inherently be part of how bending works. Where my current working theory comes in is this. It seems that the elements themselves might have some kind of inherent natural chi within them. And your bending affinity has more to do with probably the chi that you were given from your parents and not necessarily like your physical genetics. So it would stand to reason that certain kind of personal chis would have certain attributes to them. Something that would differentiate you on the spiritual level, not just the physical level. Because what is this here? She's water bending and the water is glowing. So I think we can pretty safely assume that this is probably some form of chi-based healing, right? So why is it just waterbenders who can do this? I mean, splashing water on yourself does not instantly make you heal faster, and it is specifically stated to be something that only waterbenders can do. Now, thematically, this has more to do with the fact that water is considered like the basis of life. In a lot of cultures, it's considered to have healing properties, and we know that spiritually blessed water in this world does work a lot better than just any plain old water, but any plain old water will do. So why can waterbenders do this, but no other benders can do this, if it's just chi? Personally, I feel like this solidifies the idea that there are different elemental chis, and it's not necessarily your genetics, but it is the balance of chi within yourself that dictates what you can bend. Because waterbenders can't just heal you with their chi directly, and no one can heal you with their chi directly, but they can with water. But you can't heal by just putting holy water on a wound. It has to be a waterbender. So somehow the combination of the waterbender's chi and the water's chi are intertwining and creating a healing force. If you have thoughts on this, please share, because this is not fully formulated, but I really feel like that cements the idea that the elements themselves must have some kind of innate natural chi within them. This could explain why metal bending is so difficult for earthbenders. If you think back to how Guru Pathik describes it, it's not necessarily the fact that it's metal, it is earth, it's the process of refining that removes their ability to bend it. And so basically, it's simply harder to bend metal because there's less of the natural chi within it. So let me know what you think. Sokka and Katara are royalty, and this is the last I want to hear about it. Okay, well, I mean, they're not, but they are. I've had an ongoing joke in this series that Sokka and Katara are literal royalty. Depending on how you want to look at it, they kind of technically are in the very, loosest sense, right? But I did play it pretty straight-faced, and I think a lot of you thought I was being totally serious. And in this episode in particular, they do kind of solidly point out that they're kind of royalty, but not really. So in show, they are admitting, no, not royalty. Because in this episode, Sokka is rizzing up actual royalty. Can we just acknowledge the fact that he was talking to this girl for all of, 30 seconds, and she is already, googly eyes for him? Don't tell me Sokka is a non-bender. My boy's a rizbender. Or as some people in my comments like to say, a backbender. But back to the royalty question. Let's start with facts. And one, because I haven't read the comics, and two, because if you are starting with the show, this is the impression you are going to likely get watching the show with no other context. We did not know how leaders were selected in the Southern Water Tribe. Now, what a lot of us don't know, and I certainly didn't know until someone pointed it out in my comments, but chiefs, widely speaking throughout the world, but especially in the cultures that the water tribes are based on, chiefs are elected individuals. But it's not something you're taught in school, and so it's not something that can be naturally intuited if you're not used to that being the case, and you just hear about chiefs being a more hereditary position in a lot of stories and a lot of tales that we learn as kids. So even though they're part of a small, decimated village in the South Pole, we don't hear much about other tribes within the South Pole or other townships, groups, whatever that would be called. But we know his dad is the chief of the Southern Water Tribe, or at least Wolf Cove. And the only other chief we see, and again, he's called a chief, not a king, is the chief of the Northern Water Tribe. And the chief's daughter is called Princess. And this is very clearly hereditary, or it seems to be in the context of the show. If this was retconned in the comics, I don't know. But despite the fact that the Southern Water Tribe has been separated from its sister tribe for, generations probably, it would stand to reason that the son and daughter of the chief would be prince and princess, wouldn't it? And I mean, clearly Katara all but confirms it.
You're a princess. Huh. You know, back in my tribe, I'm kind of like a prince myself.
Prince of what?
A lot of things. Do you mind? I'm trying to have a conversation here.
My apologies, Prince Sokka.
I mean, see? She even bowed to him. Okay, jokes aside, this does kind of confirm that they're, quote, peasants, and it does make it seem like technically, even though they've been separated, the power structure falls back to the Northern Water Tribe as the de facto leader of both water tribes. And so what was intuited by myself and others at the time that this originally aired was that the Southern Water Tribe had chiefs, you know, in the sense that their tribes needed chiefs and leadership when separated from the Northern Tribe, but the Northern Tribe was technically the de facto, like, true dynasty, I guess. But here's what is most important. Thematically, he is like a prince, and he very much is like a prince, even though he is technically a peasant. I mean, first of all, we are so used to calling the sons and daughters of chiefs, even in history when these chiefs were elected individuals, we will call their sons or daughters prince or princess, which is, I guess, kind of a westernization of their culture in a way. Like, it's a lack of understanding of how the structure actually worked, unless they did, in fact, fulfill duties as prince or princess. But, you know, that's for someone far more knowledgeable than I am. But he is still the son, the de facto prince of the leader of the Southern Water Tribe. But I don't think it's insignificant. I think it is directly in juxtaposition to Zuko. Sokka and Zuko kind of have daddy issues in slightly different ways, and they are both the sons of important leaders in their cultures. That is why I refuse to believe that this suit-up scene is not intentionally juxtaposing two princes in the first episode. Okay, well, technically second episode, but it's a two-parter premiere, whatever. Even if you think calling Sokka a prince is a step too far, we should all be able to acknowledge Lord Momo of the Momo dynasty. Your Momoness. These last episodes are just jam-packed. We haven't even gotten to the invasion yet. Because yes, I did ask some questions about the waterbender healing, but how did we get to this scene in the first place? Because Mr. No Girls Allowed over here will not train Katara. Aang finally finds a true master to teach him and Katara, and he won't train Katara. And this is very clearly a view that has been held in the water tribes for many a generation. Because while Master Pakku is on a whole other level with this, Sokka also had to learn, hey, maybe show a little respect to the Wammons. Now, I have not seen more than just the first, 30 minutes of the live-action show, so, I don't know how it plays out through the show itself, but I do know this. There was a lot of debate about Sokka no longer being sexist in the show. And I feel like people forget it's not just that it shows Sokka's character growth, and it is kind of a shorthand to be very obvious about the character growth with something that is obviously wrong like that. But it stands to reason that these values would be inherently more difficult to upkeep when you don't have enough men around to do all these manly things that you need them to do. So while Sokka still has this kind of view at the very beginning that, oh, women just, they sew pants, they make sandwiches, you know what I'm saying? I don't know why I said it like that. But with the much more organized, much better defended Northern Water Tribe, it's not as necessary to force that change because things seem to be working pretty comfortably. So I guess you could say they have less of an incentive to fix that. She's trying to take the same route that Suki did, basically proving to Sokka, or in this case Master Pakku, that just being a woman does not make her not a warrior. Not only that, we again see that her powerful emotions are affecting things around her more so than any other waterbender we've seen. I do feel like there's maybe a path we can go down discussing even further than we have before about emotions affecting your bending, but we will leave that until I have figured out more. So she challenges Master Pakku to a fight, and she does really well. And Master Pakku is not holding back. And my favorite part is where, out of nowhere, she just makes these lethal ice discs and just hurls them at him. And there is a moment of realization. This is not just a look of surprise. This is a look of, oh, I've messed up. But at the end of the day, he is the master, and she is entirely self-taught. So one of the easier ways to resolve this conflict would be to simply make her better than him. And that seems to be what some shows tend to do today, but instead they went with another option entirely where he is definitely better than her and is not even impressed by her skill. I mean, he is, but he won't admit it. Seeing the necklace that she got from her grandmother, which was actually her betrothal necklace, is what really started to get him changing his tune. And when I was a kid, it seemed a little random, but I did end up giving it some thought later on and figured out why this is what changed his mind. For him, it's not about proving how skilled you are. He doesn't care how skilled you are. He is strictly going by that tradition for the tradition's sake. But just as you're seeing with Yue and Sokka, these traditions can lead to heartbreak. So it wasn't just that he was like, oh, that was my old fiancé and now I feel like I owe her something. It was more that made him realize maybe these old traditions don't need to remain. In many cases, when losing a tradition, you are losing a part of your culture. But some traditions tend to be inherently toxic, unhelpful, and hurtful. They let it play out so that we could intuit what that answer was instead of simply telling us what that answer is. And again, that just goes to how amazing this writing is. Because it wasn't bad writing that I didn't notice the first time. It was just because I was a dumb kid and I didn't notice the first time. Okay, so we've got like 1 or 2 more videos on this episode, and then we'll get to the invasion. Unlike the Southern Water Tribe, the Northern Water Tribe is very heavily fortified. And now Zhao and his officers are aware that they have made it to the Northern Tribe, so what's a boy to do? And these guys are just raring to go, not giving a second thought about why they haven't done this already. But Zhao explains, yeah, no, there's a reason we haven't invaded it yet. But now that he's an admiral, he can just authorize an invasion at this point. There's just one small problem. Zhao knows he's going to need every able-bodied man to make this invasion work because it is going to be rough getting through those fortifications. So he co-opts Zuko's entire crew. So when he comes to tell Zuko directly, do not get involved, he notices something. See, the thing is, I don't think Zhao was going to do what he's about to do next had he not seen what he sees here. He finds Zuko's broadswords that look very, very familiar to Zhao. And despite Zuko insisting they're antiques, the jig is up. Zhao knows. I genuinely think while it was probably in the back of his head to do this, I don't think he would have done it without that last motivating factor. Because Iroh has declined his offer to join him. So he needs some kind of motivation here, right? But for all of Zhao's faults, I don't think he was willing to resort to straight up killing off Zuko until he realized, oh, we happy? Vincent, we happy? Oh yeah, we're happy. Iroh knows Zuko is the blue spirit, right? I feel like he must. I don't know, it seems obvious, but at the same time, I had a thought cross my mind. When asked about it, Iroh treated it as though it was some kind of legend or rumor saying he doesn't think the blue spirit is real. So it begs the question, how much information got back to everyone else in the Fire Nation about the blue spirit? Was it just whispers and stories and tall tales, and did they exaggerate? Did they add new stories that never happened? I mean, surely they saw the wanted posters, but for Iroh to say, I don't think he's real, implies that even if he knows, then other people aren't sure if the blue spirit is real. He knows so many of Zuko's secrets, so my questions are, I guess, like, 1, do we think he knows? 2, do you think Zuko knows that he knows? Do you think Zuko told him? I don't know. Questions. At this point, just listening to the dialogue and how they're referring to him as a criminal, it just makes me think, what did Zhao think, or who did Zhao think that the blue spirit was before his revelation here? Look at this face. He had no idea it was Zuko. Did they think he was an Avatar sympathizer? Did they think he was a freedom fighter? Were the stories spread about him more and more about criminal escapades? Like, what does the Fire Nation know or think they know about the blue spirit? This is the kind of stuff I really wish we had, like, supplemental material. Like a lot of movies and shows, so think back to Jurassic World. Before Jurassic World Dominion came out, and I believe before Fallen Kingdom came out, they actually had websites set up that were kind of in-universe websites, where it was basically an ARG in a way. I genuinely wish that at the time this was coming out, or at least nowadays in like DVD or Blu-ray releases, like we would have like Fire Nation propaganda. Something that really embeds us in the world and gives us an idea of what the average person thought or what the rumors were about the blue spirit. Like maybe a short clip here or there of people telling stories around the fire on a Fire Nation ship or something. Because I would love to see what like the average Fire Nation soldier thinks about this, what the stories are, what people know, what's being shared, what the Fire Nation is sharing, what their posters are like, what their plays are like, more of those puppet shows, come on! So I don't know, what do you think? I know what you're saying, get to the scene already. Let's talk about what's going through Zuko's mind here. He knows Zhao is going to be after him in one way or another, right? But then he sees this parrot. And we know this guy, we've seen him before. So my question is, what is going on through Zuko's mind when he realizes that these pirates are back? Immediately, he obviously knows he's in danger. And the very next thought is, oh god, explosion. And once again, the writers just let us sit on this. Bird, eyes, explosion, sad Iroh. Anyway, you like love stories? Actually, speaking of Zuko and Sokka, does this sound familiar?
Everyone's happy.
I'm not happy.
But you're never happy. Come on, Aang.
I know that famous line from Zuko isn't until book 3, but come on. We just got finished talking about how these two are juxtaposed. I couldn't ignore it. But meanwhile, yeah, they let us sit with the idea that Zuko is just gone now. Once again, in a kid's show. Like anyone with logic watching this is going to be like, they obviously didn't kill him off, right? Despite what our logic tells us, though, they cliffhang this really well. But back to what Zuko is thinking, because now we have to wonder what Iroh is thinking. Iroh says he knows who did this, and it's the pirates that they had an encounter with way back. And Zhao is very pleased with this. Now, I believe the only reason Iroh agrees now to change his mind and become Zhao's general for the invasion is because he is working with Zuko. But despite the fact that that is probably the intended interpretation, there is also another interpretation I like to play around with sometimes. that he really does think it was the pirates, he really does want revenge, and he agrees to go on this mission out of frustration and anger, only to later find out that Zuko was on the ship the whole time posing as a soldier. And that's when they started to team up. Now, he probably found Zuko right after the explosion, probably in the water or on the dock or something like that. Zuko swims up, something happens off screen where he finds Zuko. But I just think it's really interesting to think about what if he didn't know until after he agreed to be Zhao's general. Where once again, Zuko is donning a mask to steal the Avatar from Zhao. I will get more into this in the next couple of episodes, but this is actually very good foreshadowing. I don't know if the foreshadowing itself is intentional or just retroactively you can make it look like foreshadowing. But on the one hand, he is donning a mask to steal the Avatar, but having learned many lessons that he hasn't quite fully processed yet, he is on the way towards his true destiny. And while he doesn't realize what that destiny is, very soon he's going to realize that by stealing the Avatar, he is effectively saving the Avatar in a lot of ways. And in that sense, also saving himself and putting both himself and Aang on the correct path towards their destiny together. But that'll come in the two-parter finale. Just like the premiere, the finale is a two-parter. And just like the premiere, there is so much to go over in just 2 episodes. So let's start with Katara. In universe, I think they've only been at the North Pole for like 2 weeks. And in that short span of time, Katara has improved immensely. And once again, we are reminded she is a prodigy. But she also puts in all of the hard work as opposed to Aang, who still really just likes having a good time. But if you listen to Master Pakku, who just last episode was telling her he wouldn't train her because she's a girl, is treating her like everyone else. So once again, it's not like Pakku's like, well, if you're her grandkids, I guess I kind of have to. Oh, I guess I'll make an exception. No, he legitimately saw the error of his ways. That was his awakening to maybe some of these traditions don't need to remain forever. And he almost sounds relieved, too, that he's got someone as talented as Katara because, by God, no one else is putting in the work. But remember, Katara learned most of this on her own. She was, with the exception of one waterbending scroll, entirely self-taught. And notice that most of what she learned was moves. So once again, when it comes to our grand unified theory of bending, in universe, the martial arts that they're using for bending are not just visual flares to look pretty for the audience or to make it more recognizable. It is an essential function of how bending works. And I can't believe that's so controversial to say. Because Aang definitely has the ability to be a much more powerful waterbender than Katara ever will. So really the only reason that Katara beats him at waterbending is because she's actually putting in the hard work. Also, low-key, I kind of want to frame this. But that's enough of rehashing old ideas on a new scene. Let's talk Sokka. Let's talk about Sokka and Yue. Sokka knows that she is betrothed to another man, but right now, just being with her is enough. They both know that they have feelings for each other, and that this arranged marriage is not what she wants. So in the spirit of cheering her up, Buffalo in the sky, you can go twice as high. Did you ask for me to sing? No. Did you want me to sing? No. But I'm not editing that out. And again, Sokka is clearly head over heels in love with her, but he does just want to cheer her up. But then the chemistry starts hitting. And just as they realize, oh, yeah, maybe we shouldn't, the black snow starts to fall. This is one of our first indications that it has been decades, maybe even generations, since the Northern Water Tribe was attacked by the Fire Nation. Because Sokka immediately knows what this is, and everyone else is like, what's going on? And with the clouds being this thick and this dark, this is a large fleet. Fast forward to the chief's big speech. Some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make. This is actually one of 2 scenes that have made a huge impact on me on this rewatch. First of all, one of the main reasons I think Sokka volunteers to go on this mission is that he knows he needs to get away from Yue for her own good, or he thinks he does, but also he really needs to get out his frustrations. But I want you to listen to this. First of all, not a single word spoken, but volumes said. But did you hear that music? The track team deserves their own video entirely, but for now, let's focus on this little love theme here. Da da da, da 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 da. I didn't go over it in the previous episode, because I didn't realize what it was until this episode. We start with the Northern Water Tribe theme.
This place is beautiful.
Yeah, he is.
And then
Winter, spring, summer, and fall. Winter, spring, summer, and fall. 4 seasons, 4 loves. 4 seasons, 4 love.
I refuse to believe that the track team just thought, we need some kind of lovey-dovey sounding song. Oh, you know what? This one sounds nice. I maintain that they snuck that in there in the previous episode on purpose. Because first of all, it's a song about love directly after a scene about love, and that in a way is more of a segue or a transition that was completely invisible on first watching. But even if you don't notice, your brain will. And again, the brilliance of the track team deserves its own video entirely. But this scene also gives me questions. Captain Mur says he doesn't think the motions themselves are fundamental to bending. While I do think we'll find that you and I probably mostly agree on everything here, I'm going to use this as a springboard to clarify my point a little bit. Because you would be shocked how many people think that it is purely ornamental. The martial arts, the bending movements are just there to look pretty. Let's start by going over the bending that does not require martial arts movements. And you might think I'm going to start talking about Sparky Sparky Boom Man, just like you referenced in your comment. No, we're going to go over something in Siege of the North Part 1, the Breath of Fire. There's a reason we're doing everything in order so you can see the entire thought process. That's why I try not to watch too many episodes at once, so I can do one episode at a time, and you can see me change my opinions in real time if they do change. While I might be jumping ahead, my opinion might change when we get to the actual episodes that I'm referencing for future characters. But back to the Breath of Fire. So what I'm not trying to say is that you can't bend at all without martial arts. I think you and I would agree that the martial arts, while not being ornamental, are certainly supplemental to the bending itself. Bending is the movement of chi through your body that is then extended out into whatever element you're bending. And it's not as if you have zero chi just because you are not doing martial arts. So why do I call these martial arts fundamental to their elements? So let's remember that Katara is entirely self-taught. So every move that she makes is something that she figured out for herself seems to work best when bending water. And what she has come up with is effectively Tai Chi. Now alone, this doesn't really prove anything. But when you transition from that fact to her learning from the scroll, we learn something new. She does all the correct moves in the correct order. If this were purely ornamental, this would have simply been about her creative block. But in-universe, it is about how she does the motions. So in-universe, your physical technique is affecting the bending. And again, it's not making it so she can't bend, it makes it so that she can't properly control it. Now, to what extent the martial arts affect the bending is certainly up for debate. Let me first explain how I was taught Chi in my martial art, and then transition from there to talk about Sparky Sparky Boom Man, Pli, and Minghua. So I was taught that Chi is effectively the energy of life or the energy of action. Like, it's a very literal interpretation of the word energy. So if you take out the spiritual side of everything, you have something that is definitely true. I can stand here and take my fist and extend it outward. That is technically a punch. But there is very little energy behind it, and so it will do very little. If I throw it faster, there is more energy behind it. If I take a solid stance, there's even more energy behind it. As you stand, there is force or energy pushing down on the earth, and because you are definitely much smaller than the earth, it's going to push back with equal force. You're not going to simply break through the ground. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you properly align your feet, your legs, your hips, your shoulders, your arms, your hands, all of that energy can transfer from the ground all the way up to your fist. That's why if I jump up and punch straight, it does not hit nearly as hard. If I want to do a jumping punch, I should be punching downward. Or maybe it's really not about doing damage and just catching them off guard, and then it really doesn't matter. The idea of Chi is that it's a visualization of the way that energy moves through your body. And yes, there's definitely a more spiritual side to it as well. I'm not totally sure what my actual real-world thoughts about that are. But I use the same concept when thinking about Avatar. Yes, you can bend without any special movements. But to your point, perhaps they can do it mentally if they're able to, quote, do multiplication in their head. Because with mirror neurons, thinking about picking something up fires the same neurons as picking something up. So is it possible to psychically bend in that manner? Maybe. That's definitely something I'd like to explore when we get to those parts of the show, but for now, I don't think that's quite it. Take Sparky Sparky Boom Man, for instance. If he was purely psychically bending, then there would be no need for movement. And yet he does move. He moves back when he breathes in and leans forward when he aims. So if this was just purely psychic, I don't think he would have moved at all, and that would have been much scarier and a lot more impressive to our little 12-year-old brains. So the fact that some movement remains, I feel, is important. And no, I have not read Yang Chen, and I understand that there are scenes that kind of explain how this happens, so again, my opinion might change later, but given the information we have so far, it seems like he is still using movement. And to that end, just like with Dragon's Breath, it seems like there's only one kind of bending he can do that way, because all he's doing is exploding. So in this way, even if it is purely psychic, you would still need the martial arts to bend in the ways that the benders bend. Like, no one's just standing there dead still with spirals of fire going around them and little dragons shooting off with them not moving a muscle. And if there are, that's either in the comics or I have 100% forgotten about that. So again, if that becomes the case, I will walk this back. Really, the only person I would say is truly psychically bending is going to be Yukon, and even then, I really want to rewatch it before I say that for sure. And I've already made my feelings like this expressly clear, but it is still seen as an exception in the show. So in a way, that is the exception proving the rule. We will cover pro-bending and how that affects this idea when we get to Korra. I really don't want to jump the gun too hard on that, because I really need to rewatch it to know for sure what my opinion is. Since we're talking about Sokka and Yue, let's talk about Yue's dad. If they say this explicitly in part 2 and I just don't remember, I'm going to feel real silly about asking this. Does the chief know that Yue and Sokka have a thing? Like, I don't know. I get the sense that he wants Yue to be happy, but at the same time, he feels obligated to keep with tradition and get her married to this guy. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but did he purposefully wait for Sokka to shout something out? Because clearly he must know this guy because he is betrothed to his daughter. He knows his personality, he knows his arrogance, so did he just wait for Sokka to blurt out a correction? So that then he could just blatantly say, "Ah yes, you will be working with my son-in-law." And then get Sokka to give him every single detail that he will need for the mission. Did he know that they would have an argument and was waiting for that so that it appeared as though he was punishing Sokka, making sure that the one guy who truly cared for her was there by her side to protect her? So tradition or no tradition, now is not the time to be discussing that. Was he being a little manipulative? And did he know that they both loved each other? I don't know, something about watching this sequence of events unfold just made me think, what if he knows and is just not saying it? And I'm going to be honest, there is a lot of that going on in this show. That, or if you look for something hard enough, you'll find it. I know for a fact that there is a writer and a director on this show who would absolutely do that on purpose without explicitly ever revealing it. And again, maybe they do reveal it and I'm just going to look silly. But okay, let's see who wrote the episode, let's see who directed it. Okay, yeah, obviously the head writer is going to be the one writing the finale, and we know Aaron Ahaz has a tendency to do something like this. As for the director, Dave. Let's finally talk about the siege itself. First of all, they see this coming, and we absolutely know that Aang can obliterate these with airbending. So I get it's not going to be every single fireball, but could you not stop the first one? We are one shot into the siege itself, and already your defense has problems. But that's okay, because he then goes on his own to take down these ships. Let me tell you, watching Aang cause these ships to basically just destroy themselves is amazing. I love that this scene shows Aang as being both super playful and super destructive. And even later on when he's like, oh no, there's so many, and like, yeah, that's a big deal that there's so many, but he's like, I took down 12 ships. You were by yourself! Let's just take a moment to appreciate the fact that he has come so far in the few months that he's been awake, basically, that he is able to now obliterate 12 Fire Navy ships by himself. I do have one more question though. How weak is the metal that people are using for chains? Like, Appa just flew off with this guy and the chain just snaps. Just like when Zuko broke Iroh's chains with just an axe kick. What metal is this? How weak is it? How brittle? Why are you using it for chains? It's okay, it's cartoon logic. It's cartoon logic. And while all of this is going on, it is Zuko's time to move. And Iroh finally voices what we all know. Zuko is like a son to him. This is Zuko's real father figure. Zuko is still insecure, and therefore he still sees his biological father as his real father, but deep down he knows it's Iroh. But for him to arrive at the precipice, he's going to need what comes next. My little baby have to destroy people. Before we get to the Spirit Oasis, let me talk about this real quick. I had asked before if firebenders were bending heat or if it's explicitly just fire. For things like the steam breath, you could make an argument that there's little fires going off in their nose, heating up the moisture or whatever. But this scene right here tells me one thing. There is no fire coming from his hands. This is pure heat. Now, maybe it requires special training or for you to be at a certain level to be able to just make it heat instead of full-on fire. Or maybe this would be fire if he wasn't underwater. But either way, he is still generating heat without fire. And there's been a lot of discussion in my comments about how much the martial arts affect the bending itself. Well, it's always remembered that the bending will still be there without the martial arts. But I do maintain that this is not turning into a dragon and attacking people without him doing some bending motion. And we'll cover this more when we cover the spirits, but let's just take a moment to appreciate this absolutely chilling line from Zuko.
You rise with the moon. I rise with the sun.
Actually, in that fight, there's a lot of really cool lines. First of all, that is such a cool shot.
You little peasant. You found a master, haven't you?
That's so sick. Okay, now let's talk about the Spirit Oasis. We need to talk about the moon and ocean spirits. Because I have two really big questions. First of all, why does the moon spirit affect the actual moon? And second, what would happen if it was the ocean spirit who died and not the moon spirit? Tui and La are the ocean and moon spirits, and they are here in physical form as koi fish. We learn from both Zhao and Ko, the Face Stealer, that they have given up their immortality to live in the mortal realm. And we will definitely have to do a spirit world talk after this. So when Zhao steals the moonfish koi, the moon starts to go red immediately. I mean, basically all that's happened is that the koi fish is in danger. It's not like it's harmed in any way other than being out of the water. And yet even while the koi is still alive, this directly affects the moon. Why? Now, in the last episode and this episode, they're referred to both as the ocean and moon spirits, as well as the ocean and moon. When you think about it in terms of creation myths, I think that's quite literal. In a lot of like nature-based mythology, it's not that there's the god of the sun and the god of the moon, or spirit of the moon, spirit of the sun. There is the sun, who is a spirit, and the moon, who is a spirit. Even without invoking things like harmonic convergence and the fact that the spirit world and mortal realm were once one and the same, we can come to the same conclusion here. It must be the case that the ocean is the ocean spirit, and that the moon is the moon spirit. So it's not that affecting these koi is affecting the moon, it's the fact that the koi and the moon are the same thing. In other words, if the moon spirit had not decided to stay in the mortal realm, would there have been no moon at all? Because again, thinking about creation myths, that kind of feels like that's the case. There would be no moon without the moon or moon spirit being there. Which brings up my follow-up question, what about the ocean? Because when the moon spirit is actually killed, the moon is gone. It doesn't appear to be eclipsed or black, it is gone. So if the ocean spirit dies, meaning the ocean dies, does all the water disappear? Because the moon and the wind are what makes the waves, but in the Avatar universe, it's the push and pull of ocean and moon, right? But if the moon completely goes away, then wouldn't the ocean completely go away? Like, would all the oceans just dry up? This is actually what makes me think that this is going to be really significant to figuring out how bending works. Because first of all, I think the simple answer is the writers just didn't think about that. Like, when you are fully immersed in the story, it doesn't matter because it doesn't come up. So along that same vein, I do think we need to allow a little bit of leeway for just the purely mystical when we're talking about bending. Especially when it comes to things like energy bending or just the chi used in bending in general, there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room. Just so y'all can hold me accountable as well, let's make sure that any grand unified theory of bending that is extremely like hard magic cannot be correct. There has to be allowance for a little bit of hand waving. There has to be a little bit of wiggle room of soft magic in the explanation. The yin-yang is actually a great way to explain this. Remember, it's not yin and yang, it is yin-yang. While there is light and shadow, they are both the same thing. It's not that light causes shadow, it is that shadow is an aspect of light, and light is an aspect of shadow. Yin-yang is talking about two aspects of the same thing. So while you can certainly make some black and white statements, pun intended, about each aspect, the whole is a little less concrete. I really do think it's the same way for this grand unified theory of bending. There are certain aspects we can be black and white about, but a lot of it is kind of in that gray area. Because a lot of it comes down to philosophy, to art. But that's not going to stop me from trying to be specific about some things. What does happen if the ocean spirit dies? This scene needs to be taught in film school. To show the scene to you in just a second, and then we're going to talk about why this is the perfect example of dramatic timing, and it should be taught in film school. I am going to play the whole thing, so please stick around.
It's over.
No, it's not over.
Originally, I was just going to show a couple screenshots and talk about how amazing it was. But to really appreciate what we're about to talk about, you have to see it again, in its entirety. So the first thing I want to talk about is the timing. This is a masterclass in dramatic timing. I am telling you, a single frame more or a single frame less, and it would not work nearly as well. This is so precisely perfect. You can have all of the same elements, but if the timing is off, it does not hit the same. There are three people who know this best. First, we have comedy writers, then we have horror writers, and then we have some guy at Apple. So fun fact, if you've ever gotten an Apple device, especially a computer or a phone, you will notice that it actually takes a second, or specifically 7 seconds, to open the box. Well, I think more like 3.5 or 4 seconds now, but we'll get to that in a second. Dramatic timing is so intrinsically part of the human experience that it was actually manufactured into the boxes that hold your technology at Apple and now actually Microsoft as well. Back in the day before the iPhones, the boxes that you got your laptops in would take approximately 7.3 seconds or something like that to open. They did a lot of studies and precisely timed so it would build anticipation and then have a payoff. As time went on, though, people started to get frustrated because they didn't realize that this was a feature, and it really felt like it was taking too long. It was too hard to open because what you were supposed to do is start lifting the lid and let it slowly slide out. But as people's, I guess, attention spans or expectations grew shorter and shorter, they actually changed this to be more like 3.5 or 4 seconds. Still enough time to build up that dramatic timing, but not so long that people started to get frustrated. That might seem a little bit of a weird tangent, but this just goes to show how important timing is. Think about just the matter of seconds it took to go from this frame to this frame. Combine that with the dissonant rising strings, add on the Buddhist chanting in the background, and all of this buildup is leading to something. You have smaller moments of small buildup, small payoff, more buildup, more payoff, big reveal. In the music, the dissonant strings are kind of the hero building the tension, but without the Buddhist chanting, you almost can't fully hear in the background. It would not have worked nearly as well. The same goes with the timing, even something as simple as he looks, pause, they bow, hold, and only then does it pan over and we see him rush the water over them. It is so simple and yet so incredibly effective. This is the finale, so they definitely spent extra attention on this, and you can tell. Not a single frame was wasted. All this for a show that is ostensibly for 12-year-olds watching Nickelodeon. If you have to boil it down to the one thing I think should be taught in film school, it is the timing. But if you want me to go a little deeper into some of the other aspects that went into this scene, let me know. If your film professor has ever said anything like, well, if you can't feel it, I can't teach it, let me prove them wrong. Like I said in the original video, dramatic timing can be quantified. Businesses do this all the time. And by the way, some people can't just feel it right off the bat, they have to learn. That's why you have to fake it till you make it. Let's go back to the scene. I have removed the music, and I'm going to do what I call the breathing method.
It's over.
No, it's not over.
Did you catch on to what I was doing? First, cut your scene into dramatic beats. Each beat is where you want people to start feeling that pang in their chest of, oh God, what's going to happen next? After each beat, take a deep breath, be the most dramatically invested member of the audience. How would they go? Proper timing is deciding whether you want to give people enough time to process what has happened and then wonder what is coming next. For scenes like this, you want people to be doing both constantly. There are times where you want people to process what happened but not be able to wonder what's coming next, or to overload them to not be able to process what's happened and then pause at the end to try and figure out what's going on next. And for people who are overly expressive, this will manifest in the form of on the last beat before the payoff, you want to breathe in and hold until the payoff arrives, and then slowly release it out, that relief that you're getting from the payoff. The reason you want to do it that way is because you know it's happening too fast if you breathe in and you're almost immediately breathing back out. But it becomes too long if you start focusing more on the breath holding than looking for what's coming next. I guess the best way to describe it is when the chicken starts to taste like chicken, if that makes any sense. There's also one other method I use. You can also give the audience questions, because again, these are going to be questions that either consciously or unconsciously they are going to be thinking while watching the show, or should be thinking while watching the show. Not to get too deep into state breaks or things like that, but if you let them linger too long on a question, then they start to ask more questions that you maybe don't want them asking. And if you don't give them enough time, they're not going to be able to complete the thought. And sometimes that's what you want, but sometimes you want them to complete that thought so the payoff is better, because the payoff is in direct response to the question they just asked. Let me show you.
It's over.
What's going to happen now?
No, it's not over.
What is he going to do? Where is he going? What can they see? What's with the koi? Notice that there's always enough time for me to ask these questions, maybe a bit of a longer pause here and there, but it is never too fast. Let me show you what too fast looks like. I won't be asking the questions, but if you want to try this for yourself, go ahead and ask along with the video so you can see exactly what I mean.
It's over.
No, it's not over.
Hey, I even added the music back, so why doesn't that work as well? When you're writing, you are listing the things that need to happen, but how do you make them happen effectively? Understand that your audience needs time to think. Not a lot of time, but they do need time. So to craft your timing, you have to wonder, how much time do I give them? Do I want to give them time to think so that the payoff is more impressive, or do I want to keep them going so the payoff is more relieving? Now that we've gone over timing, let's talk about the music. Chris says visual changes should match audio changes for best results is a tried and true principle of music videos. And you are technically correct, the best kind of correct, but let me expand on this a little bit. Now, if you are making a music video, job done. But even with music videos, that's not the entire story. So yes, you should change your cut with the beat, but how many beats should each shot be? When you're talking about TV or movies, especially television, especially animated television, usually the music is actually put over the animation after the fact. So yes, the video editor could make these changes, but it is usually the audio engineer who is making a lot of these changes to the audio itself. That's why you'll notice a lot of production music has different layers. Sometimes you'll hear all three layers together. Sometimes they'll split it up, and they use that to make new sounding things that can last longer than just that 1-2-minute audio clip. To illustrate my point, but also to segue to my next topic, here is that exact same scene, but with doom music.
It's over.
No, it's not over.
Wait for it. In a music video, the hero is the music. The video is there to supplement and elevate the music. When you're soundtracking a TV show, it should be the other way around. Also, RIP Soundtrack Pro, I miss you. That being said, the music from this scene has a lot going on. The use of a choir in a soundtrack evokes a kind of reverence and spirituality. That's why so many big reveal parts of the soundtrack tend to have some very swelling, crescendoed choral parts. There's two parts to the choir in this music. You have the whole piece underscored by the Buddhist chanting. Namu Amitofu Shini, Namu Amitofu Shini. That alone, to our Western ears, tends to have a different sort of reverence than the kind of clerical choir. You also have the sopranos rising in pitch while also rising in volume. Rising pitch tends to give this sense of anticipation. The dissonant chords that it creates discomfort. So anticipation and discomfort is, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. And on top of that, you have the Avatar theme. Ba, 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 ba. So when you get to the part where it's crescendoing with those dissonant chords, that is actually the point where the main theme is actually supposed to resolve musically. But instead, it just keeps rising, 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 rising. So your ear kind of expects it to go ba 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 ba. But instead, it goes something a little more like ba 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 ba. If you go back to my edit with the doom music, you can see why the music matters so much on top of the timing, even though you can retime any music to fit the scene. It's the horror elements. They played this entire scene like a horror. Because from the perspective of the Fire Nation, that is exactly what they're getting. And from the perspective of the rest of the gang, they are also terrified. So why shouldn't the audience feel the same? And that's also where you get into things like state control, where chills are chills. Chills from being terrified or chills because something is cool are very, very close together. Because they are both chills. You can feel both at the same time. I cannot get too deep into that. I will go on a rant for like 2 hours. Let's talk about Ko the Face Stealer. First of all, this is such an interesting and terrifying concept. It would be scary enough if it was just like he could steal your face at any time. But adding the additional tension of Aang not being able to show any emotion was brilliant. As an adult, I can look at this through a much more analytical lens. But just for a moment, I want you to step into the shoes of 12-year-old Josh. Because this is the line we were anticipating all week for the promo of the finale episode.
You must be very careful to show no emotion at all, or he will steal your face.
And then when the episode finally airs, you're introduced to this monstrosity. And adding that extra tension also adds an instruction for the younger viewers. Kids do have a tendency to follow along with what the TV says. By the age of 12, not to the extreme for the most part, but enough for this to be effective. Because whether we were consciously aware of it or not, as kids, we were trying to not show emotion while intently watching this scene. Another really cool part about this is all the interesting faces that he uses. Most of the faces are based off of masks from a Japanese theater production style called No. And this works on so many levels. On the one hand, it gives it a mystical, creepy, otherworldly feeling. Because to our Western eyes, we don't really know, and we might know, hey, that kind of looks like kabuki. No and kabuki are often confused for each other in the West, but they are different forms of theater. But that is also why they have such distinctive appearances. But even for people who know where this style of mask comes from, it also works because Ko is putting on a performance, and Aang is putting on a performance. Ko is trying desperately to get Aang to show any kind of emotion. This type of mask was designed with recognizable facial features with very, very expressive emotion on purpose so it was easier to see. Doing this also really builds the tension, not just because it's making it harder for Aang to not show emotion, but because it shows us, the audience, the juxtaposition of the two. And to have the same voice actor voice all of them, the voice never changes, only the face. So this is already disconcerting with that deep, gravelly voice. This one makes a little bit more sense, and then we get whammied. This one's not really a mask, and that is actually what makes it scarier. Because this is telling the audience that past avatars had failures when it came to Ko. And then whammied again with this creepy shot. But here's what I think is really interesting. So the blue spirit mask must be based off of a real spirit. Which brings me back to my question from a few videos ago. What kind of stories were told? What are the rumors about the blue spirit? Zhao, Iroh, and Aang know that it's Zuko. And Zhao has clearly not told anyone else. In Book 2, we see wanted posters for both Zuko and the Blue Spirit. So is this a known legend? Would the Blue Spirit saving the Avatar be in line with the legends? If people do know myths about the real Blue Spirit, do they commingle it with what they heard about what Zuko did as the Blue Spirit? I mean, heck, are there debates? Are there people who say that wasn't the real Blue Spirit? One of the main reasons I ask is because Iroh says, I don't think he exists, which means there must be some kind of rumor. This is why I want, extra stuff that would be so immersive into the world. What are the stories people tell? What if we got, a short series of, 5-minute videos of just regular people who have no idea what's going on talking about what they think is going on in the world? But with this, we only have a few more things to talk about. We are almost done with Book 1. This is the last we see of Admiral Zhao. And this final scene is the perfect example of why Zhao's character was so important to Book 1 of Avatar. Obviously, this ties directly into Zuko, but he will get his own video for most of the things I want to say about him directly. Zhao's defining characteristic is his pride and arrogance. Use this next clip as an example, but also because it's funny.
I assure you, I have everything under control. I intend to remove the moon as a factor. Remove the moon? How?
Admiral Choi! Prepare to meet your fate!
So anyway, as I was saying,
Years ago,
and we never see him again.
Great.
This is just an example of his overconfidence. I'll just remove the moon. That is the reason why he is such an important character. From the very beginning, we have been seeing that Zuko is actually a very intelligent and very empathetic person. And believe it or not, he is not less empathetic or less intelligent just because of his daddy issues. Instead, this bravado, this false pride, is conflicting with that empathy, and that creates cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance can make you a very upset, uncomfortable, and angry person. Iroh is his father figure, but also an example of what he could be like without the negative toxic traits. And Zhao is nothing but those negative toxic traits. So Zhao is all of the things wrong with Zuko without the empathy. So it was very clever that they made Zhao so powerful and yet instantly antagonistic against Zuko, in a subtle way showing both the audience and Zuko himself that he does not want to be like that. While maybe his bravado hides it a little better than Zuko's, Zhao's confidence is also completely superficial. Because our short king here cut him down to size. The only reason this look turned into this look is because Homeboy got promoted. His so-called confidence is entirely reliant on external validation. That's why he is constantly gloating. He needs to gloat to reaffirm to himself, no, I am powerful, I am strong. He is also the best example of why pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. Because even after he goes after Zuko, when he gets caught by the ocean spirit, Zuko is ready to help him. For all his issues with Zhao, Zuko is still an empathetic person. And in this scene, we really start to see that peek through. But Zhao pulls his hand back because his pride couldn't take it. He would rather die. He believes he is better than Zuko, so he would rather die than accept help, rather die than appear weak. That is the only way for him to continue to believe his own hype. Pride has consumed him, so this is the only way he can still feel in control. So we finally get a visual representation of the toxicity of false confidence, arrogance, and pride. Aaron Ahaz and Dave Filoni, name me a better duo. We really need to talk about this scene. Also, did you know that even animated shows get color graded? If you're not familiar with color grading, it's not the same as putting all the colors between the lines. Digital color grading is using a computer to change the light and color information of an image. Specifically, this is used to add style and to guide the viewer's attention to the right parts of the shot. Oftentimes, the term is used interchangeably with color correction, but that is a different step in the process. Color correction is just things like correcting mistakes, matching cameras, things like that, making sure everything looks uniform. Color grading is the artistic part of it. I don't know if most of the credit should go to the colorist or to the animators for this particular scene. So the scene starts with Zhao stealing the moon spirit. And watch the moon in this shot. It's not an eclipse, it is like liquid washing over it. I love how instead of just fading everything to red, they decide to go with that animation. So obviously the colors make sense because those are the colors of a lunar eclipse. But psychologically, red is also alert, danger, blood. So it gives the audience a sense of alarm and danger. But there is still hope because the moon spirit is just captured, not dead. But now let's look at the colors when Zhao kills the moon spirit. Notice this isn't just a red overtone, all the color is gone, and it returns when the moon spirit is returned. And then when he finally kills it, we see one last flash of color. Everyone is lit up. And then suddenly, black and white. The only color you see is when they're firebending. I love watching this fight scene. Seeing the light flashing on and off on Zhao's face shows his fear. But more importantly and thematically, the color has been fully drained. Not even the red remains. We're not in danger anymore. We are dead. If you've ever seen someone pass away, you can actually see the color drain from their skin and go to this weird bluish gray. And they have done the same for the color in here. Notice that the first bit of color comes from Iroh in this scene. It doesn't come from Zhao, it doesn't come from the soldiers, it comes from Iroh. And of course it makes sense in the story that Iroh would lash out here. But I like to believe that the art director here specifically wanted Iroh to be the first one to reintroduce color to the scene. But even just having it black and white and not slightly tinted one way or the other is a conscious decision. In a lot of films that use black and white, they tend not to use just pure black and white. If you look closely, there's usually either a blue, orange, or sometimes yellow tint to it. In films that actually had black and white film, sometimes this was colored on purpose, but sometimes it was just the color of the film. In the digital age, this is a conscious decision that is made in the color grading process. For those who don't know, I've been color grading since 2012, so it's kind of in my wheelhouse here. Now this could have just simply been, hey, we want it black and white, and so they made it black and white, end of story, no additional thought went into it. But there are two interpretations that I think were at least partially intentional here. When you want something that is dark and desaturated, you might go with a blue because it's nighttime. In your eyes, you have cones and rods. The rods are for detecting the change of light and motion, so they don't need any color information, and the cones are what give us our perception of color. When there is very little light coming into your eyeballs, your cones are doing very little work. You are mostly seeing what your rods are seeing. What little light you're getting comes from the moon and from the atmosphere. So with all of that light being diffused, you are mostly seeing blues. That's why in the dark, everything seems to be desaturated, and in some cases it has kind of a blue tint to it. So in their case, they're not completely in the dark, they can still see, which is why it looks slightly blue. But you fast forward to this scene, and you can see highlights on Appa. There is still some kind of light coming in. It is certainly darker, so part of this is simply the fact that with less light you see less color, and therefore with this much light you should see not even the blue, you just see the black and white. Because that is exactly what you would be seeing. But the other interpretation that I think was maybe at least a little intentional is the draining of life out of the shots. We associate colorful things with life. That's why in a lot of shows and anime when someone dies it will go completely black and white because the life has been drained out of what you're seeing. Last note here, y'all really seem to like my deep dives here, so if there's any topic you want me to cover, just leave it in the comments. You want to know a powerful writing strategy we can learn from Avatar? Particularly, something we already talked about from this scene. Why does the suspense in a scene in a children's show work so much better than a lot of R-rated horror movies? Now this is not exclusive to horror and is actually useful in any dramatic scene. It's just more noticeable and easier to explain through horror or comedy. So just like in a lot of horror movies, the design, the sounds, the setting are very creepy and suspenseful. But to elevate this, make it more engaging and therefore more suspenseful, all you have to do is add a mechanic. Instead of simply saying he is Ko the face stealer and much like his name, he steals faces, we add on the mechanic that if you show emotion, he will steal your face. So it's not suspense coming out of, oh no, anything can happen, it comes out of a mechanic that both the character and the audience are actively keeping track of. By adding this mechanic, instead of focusing on the atmosphere or focusing on the what if, you are focusing on the mechanic. And so that allows the what if and the atmosphere to close in from the outside. So the mechanic is basically something that you are constantly focusing on or constantly aware of. In horror, this increases the suspense because you're focusing on this, but the scary things are still out there. The what ifs could still happen, but you need to focus on this, you need to focus on this, what was that? You need to focus on this. That does kind of make it sound like a video game, so let's talk about one. When it came out, Amnesia: The Dark Descent was considered one of the scariest games on the market. Now, I did a Let's Play on my now defunct YouTube channel from way back when it first came out, and I think for me personally, the tism didn't really let me get scared. I kept focusing on all the reused Foley. There was even a point where there was a monster like right in the room next to me, and all I heard was rah-rah, 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 rah-rah. But that being said, it was done very, very well, and I understand why people to this day are terrified of this game. The mechanic that people really praise the most is the fact that if the creature touches you, you are done. You have to run away, you cannot fight back. And that is a great mechanic for making it scarier than just having monsters, but monsters that you have no chance against, you have to run away. But if it was just that, even the most scared people would probably get used to it and get kind of bored halfway through, and you would only enjoy it if you were really engaged in the story. So what mechanics do we add to make it even more engaging, something you have to keep track of at all times? Let's say that the monsters are attracted to light. So you have the added mechanic of needing to stay in the dark, and also being in the dark you can't see as well, and it makes it a little creepier. But again, this is something that over a long enough time period during the game, especially with all the puzzles, you'll kind of forget about that. So now let's add one last mechanic that is something you will constantly have to be aware of. This will end up becoming your main focus as you try to push through the story, and then all the scary stuff starts to close in on you. If you stay too long in the dark, you will go insane. This gives them the opportunity to add creepy sound effects and warping effects and make it creepier than usual while you're going a little crazy. This is also in direct conflict with the fact that the creatures are attracted to light, so you have to keep track of your light and when you should turn it off, how long you can stay in the dark. There's a lot to keep track of. And so it boosts your engagement because you are more mentally involved with exactly what's happening at all times. And it also gives you consequences for things that happen in the game world. Now let's shift gears. Jackie Chan has a very distinctive style of fight scene. He uses a lot of improvisation, funny facial expressions, and you generally have a great time. But even with gags during the fight, it can sometimes just be a fight, and that's not very engaging, it's not very funny. You have a couple goofy moments, it's a fight, and then it's done. So how do you make the fight more engaging and therefore more impressive but also funnier? You add a mechanic. One of Jackie Chan's favorite mechanics is the respect of ancient artifacts. See, Jackie Chan's character always has respect for ancient artifacts, but his enemies do not. And so on top of the improvisation, the funny faces, the on top of all of that, he has to stop the vases from shattering. He has to stop the artifacts from being damaged. And so the main thing we focus on is, oh no, is something going to break? Then when the fight scene itself comes from outside, all of the gags, all the impressive shots, all of that comes from the outside, it is instantly funnier because we are more engaged with the scenario and we have additional juxtaposition. Adding a mechanic like this works for chase scenes, it works for thrillers, it works for drama. So if you look at a chase scene and you think they probably just wrote in the script and then he chased them, there's something missing. You can start to notice that the mechanic is missing. Give them something else to focus on. So maybe you want to avoid the cops, but you're also running away from the villain, so every now and again you have to slow down and act normal. Because then both the characters and the audience are actively looking for police while they're being chased, and so the chase is coming from outside. Side note, I am not a professional writer. I have written before, but it's never been my main job. I mostly know about writing from doing film reviews because I was an amateur film reviewer when I was 18. And ever since then, I have loved getting in discussions online and talking to my friends and doing reviews. So if I ever talk about something that has a specific name in writing and I don't say the name, it's because I don't know it. So for example, if you do know a word for what I talked about today, please let me know what it's called. Can firebenders bend just heat? Because I am so back and forth on this. In the video this comment was from, I thought this scene definitively proved, okay, yes, they can bend heat. But I also had comments saying maybe we just don't see the fire because he's underwater. But let me take that one step further, because he obviously can't be heating the ice directly. So he has to be heating his body. So when you think about it, what he's really doing here is using that breath of fire technique, so it's like he has an internal fire within him. So are they only able to heat their bodies and then by extension other objects that they're touching? Is there technically like small fires inside his body? Or is it just that it is pure chi when it's in his body, as it exits his body, that's the point where it actually becomes fire? Every time I think I know the answer to this, someone points something out and I'm like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's the other way around, I just don't know anymore. But this is very important to answer because this will lead us along the correct path to figuring out exactly what delineates the elements, why they're delineated that way, and how bending works. For those of you who have been with me long enough, you remember me talking about this scene and all of my questions. Is he bending the heat and we're just seeing the visualization of heat, or is he bending the fumes or the smoke? Because fire is plasma and smoke is gas. When you're looking at this flame, this is the plasma state of what eventually becomes, if you can kind of see that on the video, that becomes the smoke. All of the same molecules are present in the flame. The flame is simply the plasma state, one state above gas, the plasma state of these molecules. So the question becomes, can a firebender bend smoke as long as it's hot enough? And is that what we're seeing here? Basically bending the fumes away and therefore creating some kind of vacuum above it and cooling it off. Or is this just a visualization of the actual thermal energy, the heat that is coming off of the lava? I don't think we ever get a concrete explanation, and I don't think we ever see this type of bending ever again, so we have no way of comparing and contrasting this precise move here. Because he's not just bending it, it is technically going through his body and out the other side, and that might be evidence that it's heat because that is energy being converted into chi and then pushed out the other way, just like lightning bending. But because fire is generated by chi and fire is smoke, smoke is fire, this could be fumes, and it's not necessarily going through his body, but he's using the move to guide the smoke, and it looks like it's going through his body just because of the angle or something. I do slightly lean towards heat bending, but is this just rule of cool? Is this just a one-off exception to the way that firebending technically works? Because remember, we do have to leave a little wiggle room for things that are not technically accurate because it is a slightly softer magic system. The more technical we get, the more problems we're going to have fully explaining it. Hopefully we will get more answers through our rewatch, but let me know what you think. Iroh was not working with the White Lotus in Book 1. He was not a double agent, he was not subverting the Fire Nation. He was a proud Fire Nation citizen, and yes, a villain in Book 1. Hold your comments until you hear what I have to say. We have talked about this before, but it's time to go over it again. We finished Book 1 with Iroh and Zuko in exile. But before this, Iroh was a retired general and still proud to call himself a Fire Nation citizen. Now, of course, he is a very wise man and sees a lot of the flaws within the current culture of the Fire Nation. But let's rewind to the beginning of the show. When we first meet Iroh, for all intents and purposes, he is retired. The character we get at the beginning is slightly lazy and very frustrated with Zuko. And while that's completely understandable with Zuko's personality at the beginning, he is a lot less patient than he is later on in the show. And throughout Book 1, we are sprinkled with lore so we can figure out that he is actually here helping Zuko for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, he still feels guilty about his son's death and is looking to kind of make up for it by helping Zuko. Zuko effectively becomes his surrogate son. Reason number 2 is he's tired and he wants to retire. While he's not anti-Fire Nation, he is tired of war. And option number 3, he wants to get away from family politics. He is the older brother, so technically he was supposed to succeed the Fire Lord. So by removing himself from the situation entirely, he avoids that whole drama. Like, he doesn't think there is any possibility Zuko could ever find the Avatar, so this is effectively a retirement for him. It's not until after it is revealed that the Avatar does exist, and Zuko might even have a chance to truly capture the Avatar, that he switches gears. From then on, we see him becoming less and less lazy over time and more active in Zuko's life and his hunt. So already in Book 1, we are seeing some form of upward mobility for his character growth. But he is not anti-Fire Nation. You can see that with the way he interacts with the gang as well as Fire Nation soldiers. Yes, he is the wisest character on the show so far, but that doesn't mean that he is against the Fire Nation or that he wants to subvert it, overtake it, or stop the war in total at this point in his life. Him working with Zhao is not him trying to subvert the Fire Nation itself, but rather Zhao personally. This is Iroh's way of helping Zuko. That is his main and at this point only driving force. So even when he chastises Zhao for destroying the balance by capturing the moon spirit, he is saying this seemingly with the expectation that he will still remain in the Fire Nation, just maybe not in the good graces of Zhao. It's not until after the final fight that they finally completely leave because, well, they're both banished now at this point. His main focus is still on Zuko and not the war as a whole. He has traveled the world, he knows more, he is more wise, and yet he is not anti-Fire Nation or even anti-war for the most part. At this point, his disdain of the war has more to do with the death of his son than the wisdom of saying that the war itself is completely unfounded. Zuko's growth is thanks to both Iroh and Zhao. Iroh from his wisdom, but Zhao from his example of where the Fire Nation culture can go wrong. Zhao is the embodiment of all of the toxic traits of current Fire Nation culture. His arrogance, his power-hungry attitude are things that are celebrated by the Fire Nation military. These are things that are celebrated in Fire Nation propaganda. And this is showing Zuko the dark side of what he could become. So while Iroh guides Zuko in the right direction, the more in the right direction Zuko goes, the more freedom Iroh has to consider the other possibilities. He is an antagonist and a villain through most of Book 1, but also a good man. Like, he's not a bad person, it's just that even with all his wisdom, his focus is tunnel-visioned. And like I said all the way back in part 2 of this rewatch, his apotheosis, the conclusion of his character arc, doesn't happen until Book 3. I guess the best way to put it is, it's not as big a leap for him as it is for Zuko, but he still needs to grow from where he started. If the last few times I talked about this are any indication, my comments are gonna be spicy. Hopefully those of you who disagree with me have watched till the end. That way, when you disagree with me, you don't miss something that I said in the video, because that has happened the last couple of times. But to be fair, in past videos, I have misspoken or poorly worded things, so we're all growing. Since the beginning of the show, Zuko was banished from the Fire Nation. It's not until the end of the finale episode that he becomes a wanted criminal. Remember, Zhao put a hit out on him under the table. He wasn't a criminal, he just was not allowed to step foot within the Fire Nation until he captured the Avatar. It was an impossible task and one of the many chains holding him back from his destiny. Under his bravado, his arrogance, his anger, and his pride, he is an empathetic, intelligent person. All through Book 1, they sprinkled little bits of his backstory and showed us what he was like before he was chained up by his pride. And simultaneously, we see him clashing constantly with the perfect embodiment of the Fire Nation's toxic traits and pride. So as we, the audience, know more about who is being chained up by these toxic traits, we also start to see him chipping away at those chains. Every conflict with Zhao shows him a warped mirror of what his future could become. Every time he learns to be more empathetic towards his crew, he starts to remember his nature. He seeks the Avatar not to help the Fire Nation, but to lift the burden he feels on his shoulders and in his chest. But every time he encounters Aang, he sees someone who he recognizes. He sees an empathetic young man and even hears Aang say, "Maybe we could have been friends." And it was in that exact episode where he just saved the Avatar. He was playing the hero, if only to serve his self-interest, and still leaned more towards his destiny. And after he gets back, he turns away from the Fire Nation banner. Not a single word spoken, not him saying, maybe I don't want to be in the Fire Nation, maybe I don't want to capture the Avatar. Nothing is spoken. And that is why it says so much. This little turn tells the audience that his chains are beginning to break, and that empathetic person that we saw in the flashbacks is still there, very much so. And this may be where it started, but I will show you exactly where he emotionally and mentally left the Fire Nation. This scene right here is the final moment where Zuko truly left the Fire Nation. Visually, he is for the first time truly going off on his own with no way of coming back. This is the moment he leaves the Fire Nation with the support of Iroh. But Iroh sees him off. Iroh hopes there is still a way that they can get back and heal what needs to be healed at home. And so it's at this moment, at the very end of the last episode, that we get our answer. Iroh loves his homeland. Zuko loves his homeland. But Zuko has grown and understands that his path leads somewhere else. At this point, neither of them has been officially declared a traitor in any way that meaningfully matters to the rest of the Fire Nation. They could potentially still make an argument for why they did what they did and why they stopped Zhao to help the Fire Nation by keeping that balance. But instead, Zuko knows he needs to leave. His path leads elsewhere. He is finally on the path towards healing and his destiny, and Iroh is there with him. It is only after that that we get the official declaration. They are now enemies of the state. Over 100 videos and 75 official parts, we have finished Book 1. First of all, thank you to everyone who is joining me on this journey. I don't know of any other show that has accomplished the same things that Avatar accomplished in just Book 1. Katara was fed up with being the only mature one in her family. She was completely self-taught and had no direction in her life. At the end of the show, she is now Master Katara. She has learned that she herself has immaturities and has learned to grow and accept her maturity and learn from her immaturities and her failures and mistakes. Aang is an understandably immature 12-year-old. Before the show ever began, he was burdened with extreme responsibility. So in the beginning, we meet an Aang who has just fled responsibility. We meet an Aang who is actively in denial. No, there's no way the airbenders are all gone. There's no way I need to be the Avatar. There's no way that this needs to happen right now. I'm still a kid. Let me be a kid. It took lesson after lesson for him to slowly but surely mature, get over many of his insecurities, but not even all of them, to get to the point we see him in the finale. He still has a lot of room to grow, but this Aang right here is almost a completely different person. This is the Aang who has accepted his duties as the Avatar. Sokka is the less mature, older sibling of Katara. He still holds on to outdated traditional values of his tribe. But other than his sister, with the amount of responsibility as the sole remaining warrior in his tribe, there's no reason for him to change his ways. There's no time to be worrying about that when he has to be worrying about the tribe. He has to be worrying about their defenses. He has to be worrying about being ready for battle. He can't be worrying about all of that other stuff. Or at least, that was his excuse until he was snapped out of it by Suki. For those of you saying it's weird that people wanted the live action to include his sexism, don't quite get the point of why it's important. He wasn't just sexist for some political messaging or something like that. This was a flaw, an intrinsic part of his character that he had to overcome. And it didn't spring from nowhere, it sprang from his past. Every character has a flaw from their past that they need to overcome. And this is not his only flaw, but this was one of the first ones that they covered. He would be kind of unwatchable and unlikable if he was completely sexist the whole way through, but showing the traditional mindset that he has not broken out of is very important. It's a starting point for the rest of his character arc and is then used to contrast later when we get to the Northern Water Tribe. They, as an entire society, have not had extreme circumstances placed on them where women had to have more responsibility. And so it became an out-of-sight, out-of-mind thing where they didn't worry about this mentality, or at least a lot of them didn't. And so just like Sokka, they basically used that as an excuse for why they kept these traditional values. And while Sokka is still immature by the end, he has learned bit by bit how to be a better leader. He was the de facto military leader of his tribe by being the only of-age male warrior. But once he was on his journey with Aang and Katara, he had those external factors forcing him to be a true leader. And what's crazy is he didn't start as a dumb character and then made more intelligent as time went on. He was an intelligent but just immature character who revealed his intelligence as it mattered more and more through the show. So this is a way that Sokka himself didn't even grow, but we as the audience grew to understand and appreciate more. Lastly, Lord Momo of the Momo Dynasty. I have said both jokingly and sometimes seriously that Momo is the visual representation of Aang's true path. In a lot of ways, he shows what it was like to be an airbender in spirit. And this might be a bit of a stretch, but when Aang gets back, it's not that no one is there, Momo is there. Aang's body is gone, but Momo is still here, where the plot is about to thicken. Momo, left alone, did not touch the koi. We know that he got scolded for it earlier, and yet here he is, not touching them. Truly, I think there's only one character in the entire show that didn't grow, and had no need to grow. Because this character is so perfect, I rarely even speak about him. Appa is so perfect you never have to say anything because you always know he's there and you always know he's right.